Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this meeting of BCP Council's Audit and Governance Committee. I'm Councillor John Beasley, the Chairman, and to my right is the Vice Chairman, Councillor Lawrence Fear, and the members of the committee are in the middle of the room and the officers behind them. Could I welcome all of you, members, officers and members of the public, and I will now ask Mr. Hanton, Democratic Services, to deal with the housekeeping issues before we go on to Hanton.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, members. Please note that this meeting of the Audit and Governance Committee is being recorded by the Council and will be published on the Council's website for a minimum of 6 months. Any councillors or officers not in the room and wishing to speak, please use the raise your hand feature and switch on your video when invited to speak. Please could members in the room only speak when invited to do so by the Chairman and mute their microphones when not speaking. And finally, please also ensure that the background noise is kept to a minimum and that mobile phones and other devices are turned off or switched to silent for the duration of the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hanton. Could I go to the agenda and ask for any apologies, please, and substitute members?
Thank you, Chairman. We've received apologies from Councillor Daniel Butt and from Councillor Anne Filer, both of whom are attending virtually, but without the entitlement to vote if that should happen at any time during the meeting. There are no substitutes, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hanton. Item 3 on the agenda is declarations of interest. Are there any declarations to record, members? There are none, Mr. Hanton. We'll now take item 4 on the agenda, which is confirmation of the minutes of the meeting held on the 16th of February 2023. Members, are you agreed that those are a true and accurate record of that meeting?
Mr. Chairman, it's Councillor Butt to this meeting. May I speak?
Can I just deal with the members of the committee first, Councillor Butt, and then I'll come straight back to you.
Of course, Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Was that assent, members? It was. Thank you very much. So, Councillor Butt.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I have already brought this to your notice and you made every effort to try and get me an answer. I was very grateful to you, but I'm still unhappy with the minuting. I was specifically invited to the Audit and Governance and I spoke at some length about the issues that sat around licensing and some of the track changes that had been made. Yet there is no reference to that at all, not even a line. All the references are made only to planning. There's no reference in the minute to licensing at all. So only if it were a reference that the licensing matters were also considered. So I don't feel that that's a true record, but I will leave the matter with you, Mr. Chairman, but I am most unhappy. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Councillor, but I did try calling you on your mobile a number of times so that I could discuss it before.
You gave me an explanation. I was extremely grateful, Mr. Chairman. It's no reflection on you. It's just that I don't feel they're accurate, but I just wanted to make that statement. So I'm grateful for your indulgence. Thank you so much.
Right, thank you very much indeed. So with the consent of members, could I perhaps make those points to be recorded in the minutes for this evening's meeting and see whether we can have a conversation outside of this meeting to rectify that principle for the future, because I think it's a valid point and I think it is one where we need to squeeze value out of these meetings, particularly when we're inviting chairs of other committees to address us and they make valid points. So members, would you be in agreement that we deal with it in that way? Thank you very much. So that takes us on to item 5 on the agenda, public issues, and I'm going to ask Ms. Zeiss, Director of Legal Services, to open the item. Ms. Zeiss.
Thank you, Chair. We had a request to make a statement this evening from Mrs. Redman, and she asked for one of our officers to read it out. When we first received her request, I didn't have sufficient information on which to allow that request or advise the chairman to allow it. But Mrs. Redmond has since furnished me with more information by email, which has allowed me to advise the chair that this statement can be allowed. So, Chair, I would recommend that you ask Mr. Hampton to read out Mrs. Redmond's statement. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Seiss. And in her absence, Mr. Hampton, could you read out the statement, please?
So Chairman, one public statement received from Julie Redmond. In response to my question about the Bounce Back Challenge Fund, at the council meeting in November 2022, Councillor Broadhead said, recent independent analysis of this array of support has been highly positive. A FOI request was submitted asking for a copy of the recent independent analysis. After at least 10 follow-up emails, we found out recent independent analysis was referring to an internal audit report at least a year old. The charts and graphs in your report pack do not contain any customer feedback. 10 emails for an answer wastes everyone's time. Customer satisfaction, 0 out of 10. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hampton. Before we go on to the next item, I've received emails earlier this week from Councillor Phipps and indeed from Mr. Redmond, and I just wanted to state that it's my full intention to respond to those emails, copied into all members of the committee as the originals were. There is a report forthcoming which I'm anticipating, having spoken at length with Mr. Shepherd and exchanged emails with him, that report will be available in a matter of days, probably early next week. And it would seem timely, given that I've only had the emails since a couple of days ago, for me to respond in that way. I would like to do that because I don't want to leave this issue, nor indeed any other issue, hanging forward to the next council, and I'd like to have the opportunity to do that, and you will then have had a response within a week, which I think is a reasonable period. So the report will be available, I believe, early next week, and it would be to everybody's benefit if the reply could include that report, I think. I don't want to open a debate on it, Councillor.
I was just going to say thank you very much for that, and I'm pleased that the report is done, because I thought it was going to take a lot longer. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for those comments, and provided I receive what I've been told I will, then I'll be true to my word. So, members, that takes us on to the next items on the agenda, and it's my intention at this stage to reorder the agenda for a number of practical reasons, and I need to therefore exchange items 6 and 7. What that means is that we will be taking the external auditors' reports first, and then we will be going on to the review of the Constitution after that. For those of you who are following your agenda, and we've completed item 5, we know we'll be going to item 7, and then we'll come back to item 6, and then we'll pick up the rest of the agenda after that. Could I welcome Pete Barber, a director from Grant Thornton, who is our external auditor. Good evening, Mr. Barber. Welcome to Audit and Governance. I would ask you if we can perhaps divide your report into 2. We have discussed this online this week, whereby we will deal with the statement of accounts and the other papers that have been forthcoming as supplementary papers for the committee. And then after that, we'll go forward to an update on the letter and the council's response to it. The letter being the issue that we discussed at some length at the last Audit and Governance meeting. And I think that was the order in which you would like to do it. So what that means is that we'll go through the process of the statement of accounts. Committee, we will then deal with the 3 recommendations attached to your papers, and we'll then go back for a verbal update, which will be from Mr. Barber and probably from Mr. Richards as well. So, Mr. Barber, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, committee. So the audit findings report that you have on today's agenda sets out the main conclusions from our 2021 statutory audits of the councils, and that was as of last Thursday, so as of the 2nd of March. I'm referring to the supplementary papers here that were circulated separately and the numbers on the left-hand side. So as set out on page 11 of your papers, our work in this area is now substantially complete. And importantly for members of this committee, as those charged with governance, following revisions to the draft financial statements to correct the errors and uncertainties identified, and subject to some final checks and quality assurance process that we need to go through internally, I am anticipating issuing a unqualified, clean opinion on your financial statements for 2021 shortly. So this is, in my view, a big step forward compared to where we were at the last meeting of this committee some 3 weeks ago, and now provides a clear way forward. Committee members will be aware that the Council's 2021 financial statements audit commenced back in September 21 and has taken until now to reach this conclusion. There are a number of factors that have been well rehearsed at previous meetings of this committee that have led to the delay. When I go through the detailed report shortly, I will touch on the main drivers for the delay. In terms of the main findings, I'm conscious that our report is very long and detailed. Our main findings are summarised on page 9 of the supplementary pack under headlines. You will see that our report has identified a large number of errors and uncertainties in the original accounts presented to audit. A number of these were material by nature, and some of the errors actually related to prior period accounts. So those disclosures, those comparators, have also needed to be restated. A large number of these errors were in respect of land and buildings, council dwellings and investment properties. And a large amount of our input in terms of audit resource has focused on this area over the last 16 months. These assets represent a very large figure at the top of your balance sheet. They also involve a significant degree of estimation and judgment. And to this end, the council uses a number of management experts. These are essentially property valuers to support the council in arriving at the carrying value for these assets. And although the errors that we identified were individually large, fortuitously, the net impact of these errors is quite modest. And we've set out the main movements on page 16 of our report, with further information on these errors and corrections set out in Appendix C. Importantly, all these adjustments have now been made, so the revised set of accounts contains the updated versions, and as a result we now have confidence that those disclosures, those revised disclosures, are materially accurately stated. And for me, land and buildings, council dwellings, investment properties is probably the area of accounts production, the accounts production process that offers greatest scope for improvement. Significant additional audit resource has been put into this area, and we've had to go back multiple times to officers before revised figures have been supplied and we've been able to gain complete confidence. Now, that is, I probably think, the area where the council needs to prioritise going forward, and we've discussed this before, but one of the observations we have made throughout this report is the need for greater quality assurance to ensure that, as far as possible, those disclosures in the draft accounts presented to audit are right first time and supported by adequate, fully reconciled working papers. And when we do come later to talk about 21, 22 and beyond, that is probably the biggest takeaway from this report. You will also see on page 9, a bit further down, that and it's actually detailed in the body of the report, that we've referenced the material error in relation to the IAS 19 net pension liability. So just as you've got a very large asset at the top of your balance sheet, you've also got a very large liability at the bottom of your balance sheet. And once again, this involves a large degree of estimation and judgment. Differing from the from the land and buildings. This error was entirely outside of the control of the council's finance team, and it was driven purely by errors identified by the auditors of Dorset Pension Fund, which then brought into question your share of the assets of that pension fund and resulted in quite a convoluted process and lots of effort on officers' parts at the council to eventually get a revised actuarial statement that built in those corrected errors. And that resulted in a £12 million adjustment to that disclosure in the balance sheet. It was actually in your favour, so it actually reduced the net liability at year end and therefore has a positive impact on your balance sheet. You'll also see that on page 9, we provide further explanations on the main drivers for the delay and the need to complete additional work. The national infrastructure issue that we've discussed at previous meetings of this committee created a lot of delay, and further work has been undertaken in reviewing the response to the statutory instrument that was issued just before Christmas. And you'll see that on pages 21 and 22, we've gone into some detail of the work we've done in that area. We're now satisfied with the revised disclosure in the accounts, but we have made a couple of recommendations there for further action going forward. BCP is never going to be a straightforward audit, given all the complexities. And I know that a new ERP system is being implemented shortly, and no doubt that will go some way to improving close down arrangements going forward. But also, I think that my reflection is that more focus is now needed on not rushing the accounts and getting them out exactly in accordance with the timelines. It's better to invest that bit of extra time in quality assurance and supporting evidence to make sure that they are as accurate and complete as possible. You'll be pleased that I'm not going to go through the whole report, but I just wanted to probably pick out a few other final key areas. So firstly, just a bit of context in terms of the signing of the accounts. Page 12 sets out our materiality, and you'll see that for the single entity that was 11.5 million, and just a little bit more for the group. So when I do come, hopefully shortly, to sign the opinion, it is to that threshold I work, and any errors above that would need to be corrected before I can sign off. Importantly, though, in relation to this report, and particularly Appendix C, you'll see that we have a lower level for what we deem to be trivial of just over 600,000. So any errors or uncertainties that have been picked up as any part of this audit will be reported above that threshold, and those are all set out in Appendix C. When we approach the audit, any disclosure in any primary statement, in any of the notes in the accounts, will be subject to some degree of audit check back to some sort of documentation. And your accounts are very long and involved, so there's checks done on every single disclosure. But as you would expect, we prioritise the areas of greatest risk. And any figure in any of the primary statements that is above that £11.5 million materiality will be subject to enhanced audit procedures. And then we have the areas of greatest focus, which we deem to be significant risks. And these significant risks are set out, and our findings in relation to each of these areas are set out on pages 13 to 17. I've already covered off some of these areas. So you've got the land and buildings and the pension liabilities that I've covered, but probably the only other one I wanted to touch on is on page 13, which is the significant risk in relation to management override of control. And this is a default risk that would appear on any audit at any council, and is all about those areas of accounts subject to greatest estimation and judgment, but also is focused on journals. And journals are interesting in that they're quite an easy way, should you wish to do so, to move money between accounts, between balances, or even between years. So it's a real focus of our work. And for the longest standing members of the committee, you will be aware from last year, from 1920, given some of the inherent control weaknesses around IT, we've always had to do large samples when it came to journals testing. And we've also had a challenge historically of getting a population of journals that are user-friendly in terms of actually picking our samples and drilling down into the detail. And I think it's been exasperated for 2021 in that when we started doing the risk assessment for journals, we did come across the fact that a number of authorisers of journals had actually been instructing more junior members of staff to post journals on their behalf, which they then in turn authorised themselves. So a complete override of the control that should be in place. And that resulted in us having to further extend the journal sampling to even more to satisfy ourselves that those journals were appropriate. And when we concluded the work we did across the very large sample we picked, concluded that all journals were appropriate. But it's just really indicative of the extra work that's had to be undertaken in a number of areas. And probably the only other area I wanted to mention, which no doubt will form some of the questioning later, is to draw members' attention to the Appendix D in relation to the audit fee. So this is set out right at the back of the report on pages 61 and 62. So you will see that there has been some further significant increases to the fees that we're proposing for discharging our role for 2021, and this is since the indicative fee that was submitted at planning. Now, some of these are absolutely, from an opinion point of view, due to national issues, so the infrastructure being an example, but also some of these additional fees are BCP specific. But if I look at the total fee, it's probably just worth pointing out that the fee has increased not just because of opinion work, but because of VFM as well. So you will recall that we completed our 2021 VFM work in the summer last year. That culminated in our VFM Auditor's Annual Report being presented to, I think, the October meeting of this committee. And 2021 for VFM was the first year of the new NAO VFM code. So by definition, for all councils, our VFM fees were going up because it was a much more involved exercise. And that was further increased due to the additional work that we had to do last year to conclude on that VFM work that culminated in that critical auditor's annual report that I presented in October. If we take the opinion, yes, some of the extra fee was incurred because of issues outside of BCP's control. The infrastructure statutory instrument in response to that being a classic example, as was the extra work that we had to do on the pension liability and the actuary. But I suppose that shouldn't really detract from the extra work that's been driven by complications in us receiving accounts that were not always fully supported. So what we will be looking to do, working with officers going forward, is to learn from 2021 and look to make sure that we can refine that arrangement and process going forward to minimise not just the work for us as auditors, which in turn will reduce your fee, but also the level of input from finance colleagues. Chair, I will stop there, but happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Barber. I think it would be appropriate for me now to go to Adam Richins, Chief Financial Officer, to give his response and any comments that he might like to make, after which I will go to members of the committee. We have the Leader of the Council with us, I'm very pleased to say, this evening, and I believe that he would like to speak about the letter which is after this item, which we'll come to separately. So, Mr. Richins.
Thank you, Chair. And by way of context, I think, for this report, I think it is important that we remember that 2020-21 was quite an extraordinary year, you know, with regards to the challenges that we faced as a council and as we faced as a community, and clearly as we faced as a complete team in trying to fulfil some of the responsibilities that we have by way of statutory requirements. I also would like to start by thanking everybody involved in achieving this unqualified opinion. Now, I think the auditor referred to it as a clean set of accounts, that actually we strive to achieve this unqualified opinion on an annual basis, and it is really reassuring that we've actually managed to achieve that for 2020-21, which will have been only the second year for BCP Council, and clearly we need to bear that in mind, when we look at the report in front of us. I would like to reassure the committee that as a council we take our statutory requirements incredibly seriously, and as evidenced and discussed by the external auditor, we will be looking to improve our quality assurance processes and looking to improve the quality of the accounts going forward. We are very much reliant on the new financial system that is being implemented in the 1st of April of this year, but I don't lose sight of the fact that that is this year. That it will be the 23-24 accounts, and there'll be 2 sets of accounts in between that where we've had to rely on the information of the current financial system as part of our production of the accounts. I would also like to note, or for the committee to note, in arriving at the position as stated, that there has been no amendments to the previously stated financial position of the authority. So there's no movement with regards to what we recorded as a financial outturn for 2021, and there's been no amendment to the stated reserve position of the council. There have clearly been reference to a number of adjustments, but they just basically net to zero within the authority's overall accounts. Chair, that's probably all I want to say at this stage, but clearly happy to answer any questions that members may have of the committee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Richards, and I'll refer questions to either Mr. Barber or to yourself as appropriate. So, members, do you have any questions of either Mr. Barber or Mr. Richards?
I'm sure I have some.
Councillor Cox.
Well, first of all, I wanted to echo the congratulations on achieving a clean report, because I appreciate it's been a Herculean task to get there in the end, and it's just a shame that it's taken so long, and I don't think it's done the reputation of the council any good for it to have taken so long. My general impression is that, however, that it has taken so long, and that we seem to have gone on a retrograde step, from the first year, because as you said, it's the second year. And is that entirely related to COVID, or was there another?
Chair, if I may respond.
Mr. Richards.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of factors, to be honest, in the sense that clearly COVID was a challenge to everybody, and clearly the focus of my team would not have been producing the statement of accounts in April, May of 2020. It would have been responding and supporting business grants or whatever that we were doing to support our community through that period. But it's also, I think, a reflection of the annual incremental improvements in the standard to which we have to achieve, and actually responding to that as part of that process. And as I said, we do strive to improve on an annual basis. We do strive to make things as efficient and effective as possible. And I think there is clearly a need, from looking at the detail of the report in front of us, for a period of reflection, a QA process being put in place with regards to ensuring that when we come to look at the next year's accounts of 21-22 and 22-23 accounts, that actually we take on as board as much learning as possible. But as I said, the quantum step we're trying to make is when we move into the new financial ledger, which we'll get from the 1st of April this year. So there will be that interim period, which I think will still be a little bit of a rocky path, but hopefully it will lead to a much better outcome when we get there.
Councillor Cox.
Thanks, Adam. I suppose there's three specific questions we're going to ask to different people. I suppose I wanted Nigel's comment on the management control issue, which is fundamental to the accounts and the financial well-being of the council. But that is fundamentally part of your job, is the internal controls of the council. And so I just wanted your comments on that issue, which was highlighted by the auditors, to do that. Shall I just do the other questions as well? So that
Yes,
Or shall
and
do them
I
one
can
at a
then
time?
I can then redirect them as appropriate. Thank
Okay.
you.
The other one is Mr. Barber. There's £20,000 that you've identified in your audit fees as being, I think, negotiations to do with DLUC. Was that £20,000 as a result of the failed beach hut saga? And was that specifically to do with that? And finally, well, not finally, but the next one is there's a talk in there about £2.7 million worth of an adjustment to do with depreciation, and that being an income adjustment. It strikes me as that, if that's the case, then that's about 50% of the net surplus for that particular year. So it didn't strike me as being particularly small beer. I appreciate it's underneath the £11 million adjustment for audit purposes, but £2.7 million extra depreciation. Although at the back of my mind, I've got this funny feeling that you're going to come up with some local government jiggery pokery, as I call it, to do with depreciation. But I might be wrong.
Thank you, Councillor Cox. I'll go to Mr. Stannard first around internal audit. Mr. Stannard.
Thank you, Chair. And Councillor Cox, I think you're referring to the journal issue mainly. Thank you. Yeah, so internal audit, you're right, it is one of our fundamental responsibilities to hold management to effective internal controls. On this particular example, you may recall that when these were raised in the previous year, 1920, there was quite an extensive management response to the issues Pete and team identified. So there was a commitment to rectify some of the issues that Pete's team has identified, but clearly not all of those issues were resolved to the external auditor's satisfaction. So what I'm saying in a long-winded way is we do place reliance on the external auditor. We do look at things periodically in the interim period between audits, external audits. Yeah, it's one of those areas that we've just got to keep our eye on, and you know, Pete has a different benchmark sometimes to in terms of the overall controls that he's looking for.
So could I go to Mr. Barber with regard to the VFM engagement with DLUC? Mr. Barber. Mr. Barber, you're on mute.
Sorry, Chair. Thank you. So I'll try to take, if I may, Councillor Cox's questions and observations in order. So I just wanted to make a comment back to the timing of the audit process, and we missed it for this agenda. But what I will do is share, if I can share, a report that Grant Thornton has issued in the last week, I think, called About Time, that reflects on the ever-increasing length of time it takes to discharge our responsibilities. And I think that is helpful context, because I did mention it myself at the outset that it has taken 16 months, but rest assured, you are far from unique in being in that position. We do actually have some audits that are even older. Clearly, from everybody's interest, it shouldn't detract from the focus on speeding up the audit process, and the report explores some of the ways of doing that. And I think that would be a helpful read to inform how we work together over the next 6 months or so to improve the timing of the delivery at BCP. In terms of the two specific questions, the value for money additional fees of £20,000 is for the totality of all the additional work that we had to do across a number of areas in arriving at our final VFM report last summer. There was absolutely a number of meetings that I had with DLUC to discuss one particular issue, which was the council's approach to seeking to fund revenue transactions associated with transformation from capital receipts under the Capital Flexibilities Initiative. And you're absolutely right, to a large extent, those capital receipts were to be potentially obtained from the Beach Hut initiative, but that is an element and only an element of the £20,000. Clearly, there's a whole raft of other areas, including additional work on children's services, etc., that make up that additional fee. And then finally, in relation to your observation about the depreciation and the 2.7 million, this is an unadjusted error, so it doesn't affect the any of the primary statements. The observation that Adam Richins made about having all the issues having no impact on the CEIS holds true. This is purely in relation to the emerging national issue in relation to infrastructure, where there was, as a result of the statutory instrument, further work required by auditors to challenge councils on the appropriateness of their useful economic lives for those assets. And what we did is we compared your useful economic lives across your infrastructure assets with the averages provided by SIPFA, and we identified a difference of 2.7 million. Under auditing standards, we're required to report that, but it is an estimation difference and not a specific actual error that requires or necessitates correction, and it is below materiality and therefore has no adverse influence on my proposed audit opinion.
Thank you, Mr. Barber. Chief Executive, Mr. Farrant.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, just struggling to come off mute. A comment in the beginning about local government jiggery-pokery, and I'm afraid that in a conversation about the annual audit at a formal audit committee, I couldn't let that phrase go unchallenged, and just wondered if Councillor Cox could either expand or withdraw the comment, because that feels like a very strong phrase to use.
I was certainly not trying to imply anything. I was just sort of saying that sometimes the local government do things in a strange sort of way that normal accountants don't do things. And I'm just for instance, I've got this strange thing in the back of my mind that depreciation is a bit of an in and out, so it didn't make any difference. But I might be wrong. So certainly wasn't meant to imply anything, Graham.
Okay, thank you. So if I sort of remember the phrase of the complexity of local government accounting standards, that is a suitable substitute. Thanks. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Chief Executive. I think it's important. This is a public meeting. It's on the record. People can play the tape back, and I know that our conformity with local government finances is absolutely right. So I'm glad that you managed to withdraw that. Did you want to come back, Mr. Richins, on the latter issue, notwithstanding that it's been partly answered already?
Yeah, I was, if I may, Chair, just going to come up on, I'll pick the member up on the same phrase, because clearly there is a lot of work by my team in conforming to the standards that are required of local authority accountants and in the production of their accounts. And clearly that kind of phraseology doesn't do anything to motivate them with regards to doing a good job. You know, maybe also as part of that, just to explain to those people that don't really understand local authority accounts, just to give a bit of background, in the sense that when I started in local government accounts 37 years ago, there was a way of producing local authority accounts, and then there was a way of producing the private sector accounts, and they weren't the same. Now, and what over that period of time, there was a decision made to bring local authority accounts in and be consistent with international financial reporting standards in the way they're produced in the private sector. That meant that there has to be certain adjustments done to local authority accounts to get them consistent. And that phrase that is used is sometimes used to describe some of those kind of transactions to put them onto a consistent basis. You know, so, you know, it's about making sure that we conform to those international financial reporting standards. We do. It takes a lot of time and a lot of effort. And, you know, there is an argument within the sector constantly as to the value associated with that, because it does take a lot of expense. You know, we're paying for external auditor to check that. There's a team that actually has to do that and produce in the first instance. What value our public derive from those adjustments? So that's one more for another day, I'm afraid.
Thank you very much, Mr. Richins. Can I go to Councillor Phipps, please?
Thank you, Chairman. I just want to refer to pages 39 and 40 of the report, which is to do with the value for money. I don't intend to read it all. There's just a few things I wanted to pick out. On page 39, under the summary findings, the first paragraph is a little bit alarming. We've concluded that despite underspending against its revenue budget in both 2021 and 21-22, the Council's ability to set a balanced revenue budget in 23-24 and beyond is looking increasingly fragile. And the Council's current arrangements for ensuring financial sustainability are not good enough. And then the outcome on the right is, on this basis, we have concluded that the Council does not have arrangements in place for ensuring financial sustainability into the medium term. And then there's quite a lot of explanation there. It continues on page 39. When you get into page 40, in the centre, it mentions 22-23 budget is being predicated on the use of earmarked reserves, etc. And then it goes on to say we're concerned about the financial year of 23-24 and beyond. And then the final line or two lines on page 40 then repeats the conclusion or the outcome from page 39. Now, presumably this report was written not yesterday as such. I'm not sure when it was written, but it's now been brought to this committee, and we've obviously had it. It's been sat here a week because it had to be published, etc. So what I'm basically saying is that still your current opinion?
Mr. Richards.
Chair, if I may, because I think ultimately I think it's right to go to the external auditor to answer that question, but maybe if I can help with regards to context, because there is some clear timing issues here. This committee is very clear that the auditor wrote to us as part of the 23-24 budget setting process, and I have, as was required by that letter, is formally responded to the external auditor, and I think the auditor can hopefully give you assurances with regards to his reassurance that he's obtained from that process. But just to remind members, when council made a decision to set its 23-24 budget on the 21st of February, it did that on the basis of a budget that was based on traditional and conventional approaches to producing local authority a budget. And it did that on the basis of a set of assumptions that were in line with the spirit and intent of all local government finance legislation, and that is a reassurance as Section 151 officer that I gave to members as part of that process. Clearly, within that process, there was consideration and discussion of potential alternatives, and that was what the external auditor was responding to when he wrote that letter to us, to which we've now responded. But based on that statement, it might be appropriate to pass over to Pete just to give you hopefully some reassurance as to where we are now.
Thank you, Mr. Richards. Mr. Barber.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so I probably should have been clearer in signposting that section of this report. That section of this report essentially reflects the findings that were reported in the detailed auditor's annual report that was presented to this committee back in October, and was at that point in time and referred to arrangements in 2021. So that is a historic assessment of your arrangements that was reflected last year. Clearly, things have moved forward since then, but for completeness, the VFM findings reported previously are also summarised in the ISA 260 audit findings report that you have in front of you today, for completeness, because that is the other element of my responsibility that I have to conclude on and report on before I can certify completion of the audit. Chair, with your permission, I'll probably just also pick up on Adam Richards' comment about the letter, because clearly at the last meeting of this committee 3 weeks ago, we did discuss the letter that I sent to both the Chief Exec and the Chief Finance Officer. I in that letter asked for a formal response from both individuals. I received that letter yesterday, and I am happy to put on record that I am reassured by the comments that I received in that letter, and I'm reassured by the information provided on the changes to the budget and adjustments to the budget that were made at full council, and I'm comfortable that those changes were appropriate and there weren't any that raised any alarm bells from my perspective. And I've reflected also on the fact that the wider comments in that letter that I received yesterday, the discussions that took place at the previous meeting of this committee 3 weeks ago, but also importantly, the fact that the new leader and the cabinet member for finance have reached out to me recently, and I've had conversations with both of those individuals about not just the budget for 23-24, but also their plans going forward. And that has also reassured me further. And on that basis, I am not minded to take any further action at this stage. But I did also indicate that as part of the VFM work that we will be doing and are starting to do now for both 21-22 and 22-23, we will be closely monitoring developments, particularly around finances and how they evolve over the next few months. And we will absolutely be commenting on your financial arrangements as part of that VFM work that we hope to conclude and report on in early summer.
Thank you, Mr. Barber. I had intended to deal with the letter once we've done the recommendations, but we've moved into it. So for continuity, I think we'll expand this item into those issues. So if I could ask Mr. Richards whether he would like to respond, because you rightly say the council's response from Mr. Richards and from the chief executive was sent earlier this week. After which I will go to the leader of the council, who I think would also like to make a contribution around that, and then perhaps any other questions from members can incorporate that. And if we want to go back to the statement of accounts, we can do that also. Mr. Richards.
Not much to add, Chair, other than to say that, following the decision by Council on 21st of February, the leader of the Council has written to the Lee Rowley at government to provide them reassurances around the budget that was set. I also, and Graham, wrote to the external auditor, as the auditor has referenced, giving them his assurances, as I said, around the budget being set based in line with tradition and convention and within the spirit and intent of all local government finance legislation. That doesn't mean it's not without risk, because all budgets being set by all councils at this moment in time include risk, and a particular risk in all those budgets will be the uncertainty associated with the cost of living crisis. And clearly every local authority will have its own specific profile of risks that it will then reflect within its own financial arrangements.
Thank you, Mr. Richards. Councillor Broadhead.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and not a tremendous amount to add, and I'm really grateful to our auditor, Mr. Barber, for the meetings that we've had, both as interim leader of the council, but also since becoming leader of the council as well. And he's reflected on the formal response that's been issued by the council, and the chief financial officer has also referenced the letter that I sent to Minister Lee Rowley last week, updating them on the wider financial situation. So I probably don't need to go over that too much, except to reflect on two further points. We've talked about the budget that we passed last week, and again, I put on record, that I am grateful to other parties for entering into a spirit of collaboration, so that we were able to pass a budget that incorporated, a number of different cross-party suggestions, and I think that's important in the position that we're in as well. And as the chief financial officer has said, is predicated on all of those traditional aspects of local government finance. Adam also mentioned elements of risk, and this is a conversation I've had with Mr. Barber, and being very mindful of the risks going forward, some of which are touched upon in the report that's in front of us. One of them is the risk of the capital funding of the use of flexible capital receipts for our transformation programme. And in that letter update to Minister Lee Rowley, and in an email update that we provided to both Cabinet this week and also email update to all councillors, we have updated on the current in-year position as well as next year position. We had a minded to offer from government of a capitalisation direction if we were not able to find ways to furnish that capital sum by the 31st of March this year. However, earlier on this year, full council did pass permission to proceed with particularly 2 major asset sales of industrial estates. Those have now pretty much almost in their entirety progressed ahead of expectations as well, which means that we are, and we will not know this fully until the end of the month, but I think the Chief Financial Officer and I have a very high degree of confidence that we will be above the amount needed to avoid having to ask the government to fulfill that minded to offer. And actually, because of the continued work in those areas, we are now in a much stronger position for next year. The current estimates are around, probably as it stands, around a £6 million gap for asset sales through flexible use of capital receipts for next year as well. And so I, in the letter to Minister Lee Rowley, wrote that we have the growing confidence that we will not be needing any government support whatsoever, which was offered when they changed the legislation last year. And it's a great testament to the work of the team, to actually full council for agreeing to progress at pace with those, and also a reflection on, I think, the ability for the council to get on and make those decisions. So that's the update on the capitalisation direction. There is also the update on the risks that are still prevalent about passing a continued balanced budget for the forthcoming years. The budget that we passed this year predicates a lot on that transformation process, as well as a number of efficiencies. We have that every year, but as we progress through the transformation process, that is getting tighter, and we have to make sure that we have as close an eye on that as possible. That's certainly something that I'm very keen to see, and I've had conversations with the Chief Executive on this and updated the auditor. And I think we need an extra layer of governance to make sure that both the senior political eyes are on that transformation process, as well as the work that's already been done in-house as part of the transformation board, a little bit like we've done with such things as the Future Infrastructure Board and other programs of governance that we've got, to make sure that we are acting as a one-team approach to make sure that we can absolutely deliver that program. The Chief Exec has agreed with that, and so we're setting up something which is I've called the Transformation and Efficiency Action Meetings, which spells team, which I think recognises the fact that it is a one-team approach, mindful of the fact that we do still have a lot of work to do. We put a lot of stead in our budget and our forward plans in transformation and in delivering these efficiencies, and I'm absolutely committed to make sure that we put as much effort in as possible as a one-team approach to facilitate that as well. Chairman, the rest of the updates are in the paper, but I do think that hopefully that added push to both avoid the capitalisation direction and to add an even greater layer of rigour around transformation efficiency gives colleagues some comfort of the way ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Broadhead. Before I go back to you, Mr. Barber, I wondered whether the Chief Executive might want to add anything, given that the response letter is jointly signed off by Chief Executive and Chief Financial Officer, most particularly around 2 issues really: sustainability and delivery of transformation. Chief Executive.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the key issue for us, I think, in the budget now is that combination of risks and the coming together of, next year we have the new financial system being in place. We have some significant savings to make in order to deliver the balanced budget for next year, which are all in progress and being monitored. We also have preparation for the following year for transformation, and we're working through that. I think, as the leader has just said, getting greater input and involvement and engagement with councillors will help us, and we need to set the structures up for that. So we're doing that at the moment. I think those things combine to make some significant risks, but as Mr. Richards has already said, all budgets carry risk. We carry risk of inflation, we carry risk of demand, we have some extra risk as a result of the transformation programme and the coming together of the 4 preceding councils. So I think we've probably got as good a control mechanism as we can have in place now, and as good a system, and I think we've given the reassurance through that letter to the external auditor, and we continue to provide that to the Department for Levelling Up Homes and Communities as well. So it does feel we're on an even keel, albeit that the waters around us are quite choppy, I think I would probably say.
Thank you very much, Mr. Parent. Mr. Barber.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so I suppose that leads in to future audits and future years, recognising audit is a retrospective process. So given that this is the main item on today's agenda was with regard to 2021 opinion, and you'll be cited on previous discussions we've had at this committee about pulling out of the 21-22 audit due to a manager vacancy. We've had further conversations with officers and in particular Adam Richins with regard to the most sensible way forward. We do have resource, including a manager lined up to recommence the audit for 21-22, recognising it was at its early stages. And we have reflected, and given the imminent implementation of the ERP system, we are now proposing to recommence in early July the 21-22 audit, which also gives a bit more time to officers alongside the time they need to commit to the new system to undertake further quality assurance checks, and subject to the way that audit progresses from July onwards, and with a fair wind and hoping that there is a improvement in the timeliness of that, it will be our intention, subject to ongoing discussions with officers, to run both audits back to back, which would mean that as soon as we finish 21-22, we would then immediately move into 22-23 with the aspiration of catching up on that cycle. And in terms of value for money and the letters that we've discussed and the responses, clearly value for money, as I said earlier in my initial introduction, will cover financial sustainability amongst other areas, given that we've only got 3 weeks left of the 22-23 financial year. Also in discussion with officers, we have agreed that we will start VFM work now. Well, for all intents and purposes, it's already started because that letter that I sent and the response is part of that formal VFM process, that we will start value for money work, not just for 21-22, but we will also simultaneously undertake our review of arrangements that were in place for 22-23, and we will look to make judgments for both financial years, but summarise our judgments for both financial years in a single value for money auditor's annual report that we would look to bring to this committee this summer, in early summer.
Thank you, Mr. Barber. That, before I go back to questions from members of the committee, does though raise an issue that I would like confirmation of from Mr. Richins as the Chief Financial Officer, and that is that with the installation of the new system and the requirements that are being agreed about future audits with Grant Thornton, are you happy? Are you satisfied that we don't have a resource issue, both in terms of capacity and the availability of suitable staff? I think the committee just like that assurance so that we know that it is deliverable from our point of view.
Yeah, just to give the committee the reassurance in the sense that, I've had the conversations with the external auditor about what is pragmatic in circumstances. Producing and delivering a new financial system is a huge undertaking. It takes a huge amount of time from the team that would also be then the focal point of that liaison with the external auditor with regards to making sure that general ledger is structured, tested and delivered to the manner that we would want it to be. And I'm quite keen, during this period, not for them to be distracted on anything else other than the achievement of that effective new ERP system. So, through those conversations, I've concurred with the external auditor that the best way to achieve that is to run them simultaneously, starting in July as he set out.
Thank you for that. I'm sorry I pressed the issue, but I thought we needed that reassurance from you. Members, Councillor Phipps.
Just to come on to the dedicated schools grant, obviously that's sitting there in the background like a bit of a nightmare really. It's not grant deficit, sorry, it keeps increasing as well. The only reason we don't have to do anything about it is because at the moment it's subject to government override. Is there anything we can do about that in the long term, or we just got to let it sit there and hope the government are going to write it off or something like that? Because I do recall at the moment it says it's going to be 20.3 million by 31st of March 22. And I recall in some previous papers it was going up to 60 million by a certain period, and Adam will say when that is. I'm also aware, having asked a question on it before, I believe on a Teams call when you did a bit of a seminar with us about it, that Dorset Council approached this in a different way, and they don't have such a problem as us. Is there any other way that we could approach this, you know, to do anything with this, or have we just got to leave it there and just see what happens? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fitz. Well, I'm going to go to Adam Richards to give a response, which I think this committee has heard in part in the past. I'll then go to the Leader of the Council to see if there's anything he'd like to add to that. I then go back to Mr. Barber, because I'd like to hear from the external auditor's point of view what their relationship over this issue is, because obviously this is not the only unitary authority they have experience with, and it's a national problem. Mr. Richards.
Thank you, Chair. And if I may, I'm going to answer that question in reverse order. And I do not normally like talking about other local authorities, but you've referred to a specific local authority by way of an example. And I just wanted to highlight the fact that that local authority had more of a problem than we did. That is why they entered something called the safety valve mechanism. And that was an original programme from memory set up from about 5 local authorities. It was then extended to a few more for the authorities that had the most severe problems with regards to the dedicated schools grant issue. And what that programme required them to do was almost enter in a negotiation, an improvement plan. They had to put in some of their own resources, government put in some of their own resources, I think even the schools put in some resources to actually then try and navigate them through that issue, you know, as part of that process. And you know, I can't speak for that authority, but I'm sure if you looked at their accounts, it continues to be an issue, you know, and a challenge for them to address and going forward, as it does with a number of local authorities. And clearly, we've been not in that category, but our problem has been growing, you know, particularly since we, over the last couple of years as part of BCP Council, you know, and the ever increasing annual demand for SEND high need pupils on an annual basis, outstripping the resources that we get through the government funding mechanism to address with that demand issue. So for us, it has been an accumulating issue. And you're right, at the 31st of March this year, we expect that deficit to be about £37 million. The following year, it'd be 64 million. And then the following year, 107, going up to about 160 the following year. It is a huge, significant issue, you know, and one that we are engaged as part of a delivering better value in SEND program, you know, and that program is, you know, first of all, it challenges us about whether or not we've got those estimates right, those numbers right, and the numbers are quoted, you know, have been slightly tweaked based on their feedback about whether or not we're doing everything we can, you know, to actually address that problem. And generally, you know, I think the assessment we've got back is that we are doing everything they would expect of us with regards to addressing this issue. Yeah, and then it then leads into that conversation with government about, okay, you've now got the reassurance that we're doing everything we should be doing. What's the answer? You know, and you know, I think the chief exec is committed to writing to the Department of Education after the budget's set, so probably within the next month, just to try and, you know, provoke a conversation, you know, in that regard as to, so what is the answer? Because what we know is that when, you know, that statutory override comes off in 3 years' time, we need an answer, you know, and you know, I think everybody's right. This isn't just an issue for this local authority. There is an ever increasing number of local authorities that are, you know, through that accumulation effect in this position. You know, but for me, that's interesting. But you know, that you won't be in the lifeboat, you know, by yourself, but you'll still be in the lifeboat. So we do need to have a national conversation about what is the answer to this problem.
Leader of the Council.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I'm loving the sea-related analogies this evening. Just to build on the Chief Financial Officer's comments, it is an enormous issue, and it is one that is a national issue for many upper-tier authorities, as Adam has highlighted. The initial government support wasn't really support; it was that a mechanism was offered to those in the most trouble, and we weren't there then. But of course, it accumulates every year, and actually more authorities get brought into this national issue every year as well. All I would do is echo certainly my commitment. It is a conversation that I consistently have in my conversations with national government. They're fully aware of the issue. There's a lot of colleagues around the country that are coming together to try and have one voice to urge a resolution on this issue, and we've just got to keep the pressure up. It's not us, it's lots of different areas, but it's not one of those that just sits in a box and doesn't get any worse. It exponentially almost gets worse each year. So we will continue to use all the levers available to us to push government for an answer on this, in recognition of the fact that this is a huge local government issue.
Thank you very much. Well, it has been ongoing for a long time. I well remember when I was leader of Bournemouth, so that's up till 2019, I would probably have given an almost identical answer to that we've just heard from the leader of the council. It takes government intervention to find a solution long term. But of course, there are always other priorities for government, and doesn't seem to be any meaningful progress being made. But it is a huge concern to unitary authorities, and this one, as we've heard, is no different and in a no worse position, and probably a slightly less bad position than many others. But that is of no comfort when you see these figures mounting up. Mr. Barb, sorry, Legal Counsel.
Just to say, unfortunately, I do have to leave now. I know I said I was only able to stay for an hour, but just to thank the committee for having me this evening, and sorry I can't stay any longer.
Could we just hear Mr. Barber's response?
Yes.
And then I've just got something brief I'd like to say after that,
Sure,
before I go to questions. Mr. Barber.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm not sure there's an awful lot I can add. I would concur with the fact that most upper tier authorities to varying degrees have a big issue with DSG that's increasing every year, and along the sort of the trajectory that the council's facing. And clearly there is some things that councils can do, and the need for a deficit recovery plan is within the guidance. And I know that you, and I think I probably commented on it last summer, have a high needs recovery plan in place, and you have, and I think I also commented on this, that you do have quite robust data to inform decisions. And clearly, as part of the VFM work for 21, 22 and 22 to 23, given the increase in the deficit in those respective years, we will be interested in that area and what the council is doing to manage their position, recognising that it is a wider national issue.
Thank you, Mr. Barber. Just before Leader of the Council goes, I just wanted to say on behalf of the committee, thank you for engaging with us last meeting and this meeting, and also engaging with our external auditors and finance officers in the interim. It's something I have asked and hoped for in the past. On your watch, you've demonstrated immediate interaction with the committee and have made your contribution both with external auditors and with us, charged with audit and governance on this council. It is important, and it has been noted that you have done so, and I think it will lead to a much better sense of integration with these problems and a better understanding of actually what this council is doing, rather than it being behind closed doors. And I think that's a big step forward in the right direction. I'm grateful to you. Thank you. Members, any further questions on this before I go to the recommendations, please? Councillor Brooke.
Thank you, Chair. I'll try not to repeat anything. Several of the points that have been raised I was going to question, but don't need to now. I'm more concerned with the implementation of the recommendations that have come forward, because past experience in another life showed that while it's easy to accept the recommendations, it's much harder to actually implement them and embed them within the staffing and within the council itself. So it's really to some extent questioning our own role here, in terms of how are you, and this is to Adam and Nigel, I suppose, really, how are you going to, over a year or over 2 years, check that the recommendations that have been suggested, that put in place, how are you going to check that they are actually really getting embedded in with your staff, and we're not going to be faced with similar sorts of situations of series after series after series of errors, and the continued number of risks that have been identified? Because to me, those errors and the risks seem to be very, very significant. So perhaps Mr. Barber, as part of the answer, Mr. Barber could actually say how typical this is, or whether we have been in a unique situation compared with other authorities. So there are really two parts to the question. One is, how significant is this, or how unique have we been? And I can understand if it is said we've been unique because it's three councils coming into one. But that makes it even more important that the recommendations are put into place very quickly and get embedded and are monitored, rather than every 6 months or every annual audit, that they're monitored internally to ensure that embedding is taking place.
So I'll go to Mr. Barber first as the external auditor, if you like, overseeing all of this, and then I'll come back to Mr. Richards afterwards. Mr. Barber.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, thank you, Councillor Brooks. So the observation about the extent of issues and errors, it is fair to say that they are greater than I would come across at most audits, but not unique to BCP. There are other audits where we identify material errors that are not correctable, and importantly, errors that can impact on the bottom line in terms of the CEIS, the Comprehensive Income and Expenditure Account. And as Adam Richards pointed out, there were no issues identified that affected the outturn for the year in question, which I think you can, as a committee, take some degree of assurance on. There are a number of councils in areas such as minimum revenue provision that have been in the press for understating those figures over a number of years, and the cumulative impact on that can be absolutely devastating to the financial sustainability of those organisations. And those are absolutely the sorts of councils that end up seeking capitalised directions because they have no alternative. It's also fair to say, and I would refer, and I've put it into the chat for those that are online, the copy of the Grant Thornton report that reflects the fact that every year the level of challenge and scepticism increases, and the inevitable result of that is that there are more and more recommendations being made across the board. And BCP is an incredibly complex council with multiple different systems that is a reflection of the fact that you are a relatively new council made up of three quite distinct councils, and that brings along with it lots of extra challenges. So you've got the challenge of actually transitioning from those three predecessor councils to the new one, keeping services provided whilst also transforming, and that transformation is equally applicable to the financial role within the council, both internal and external reporting. In terms of the implementation of the recommendations, we make the recommendations, and the expectation is that the council, through whatever appropriate forum, whether it's this committee or through other processes, ensures that that those are implemented. And if we do find ourselves in a position in 12 months' time or whenever that we are repeating the same concerns and issues, that will be highlighted as part of our findings report, because one of the things we do when we undertake the following year's audit is we comment on progress against previous year's recommendations. But that is a retrospective exercise, and the onus is on the council to ensure that they are proactively monitoring delivery of them in a timely manner.
Thank you, Mr. Barber. Mr. Richards.
Thank you, Chair. And, I'll just reiterate what the auditor said. We do need to keep reminding ourselves that this was an unqualified audit opinion, and there was no impact on the bottom line from any of the adjustments that were set out within the documentation in front of us. I think previously also emphasised the fact that we do take this process incredibly seriously. We do try to learn. The problem with some of it is that there is a time lag, in the sense that, if we looked at it within the normal timetable for producing accounts, when you're having this conversation, you're already halfway through almost the year in question, the next year that you're going to be audited on. So actually, when things are cropping up, your ability to transform and change the position for the whole year is impacted because some of that year has already passed by. Hopefully that makes some sort of sense. But in essence, we do take these issues seriously. A number of issues are related to the valuations, and clearly we continue to strive with our valuation colleagues to improve the quality of information that is being provided to the external auditors. Where it's actually things that are particularly the responsibility of the team to produce, for the internal finance team, we are looking and have done assessments when we're looking at the new financial system to try and ensure that that system is addressing as many of those as possible. But as I said, that's happening in April this year, when actually we've still got 2 years of accounts before we even get there, before you'll actually see that real impact. So it might be a conversation that we have time and time again over the next couple of years until we get to a set of accounts that is relying on the new Microsoft 365 system that we're going to on the 1st of April. But at that point, Chair, what I might want to do is just pass over to Matt Filmer, who's the Assistant Chief Financial Officer, who's directly responsible for this area, because he might be able to provide the committee with further assurance around the QA and the improvement process that we're going through.
Thank you very much, Mr. Richards. Good evening, Mr. Filmer. Could you respond as indicated by Mr. Richards, please?
Thank you, Chair. I'll avoid repeating a lot of what the points Adam's mentioned. A lot of the points that have been found in terms of the audit risks and errors will be resolved as part of the new system implementation. So as an example, the issue around journals, where we have a retrospective approval currently at the council, all journals on the new system will need approval before they're posted. So although there are errors that are in the 2021 accounts, and they will probably exist in the 21-22 and the 22-23 audit, they are being fixed in the future going forward. So we are actively looking at that. I think where we can work on is, and again, Pete's mentioned it in the audit findings report, is around that Q&A of our 21-22 accounts. That's where we need to put more effort in. And that's something, once we're over the line with the new system implementation, we will review the 21-22 accounts, look at lessons we've learned from this audit, and see if we can try and improve it before the auditors come in full time to review it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Filmer. Councillor Cox.
Yeah, to some extent, what Councillor Brooke has already said was part of my questions, but I particularly wanted to focus on Nigel's role in the internal controls, because when you answered the question before, I was, what's the word? I wasn't reassured, and that this was going to be a key focus of what you were doing, because if you find a weakness in the internal controls, I would expect you to do more on that, and are you going to change the internal audit functions priorities as a result of this, at least for the next 2 years, because it says like after 2 years it might be all right. So that was one question. And then I just wanted to, with the risk of not using loose language like I used before, I just wanted to go back on the depreciation point. Can I just confirm that it was said that our depreciation rate currently is less than the average? Has anybody assessed what difference that will make going forward? That makes sense.
So can I ask Mr. Stannard to deal with the first of those two questions, please, and then I'll go back to Mr. Richards on the second. Mr. Stannard.
Thank you, Chair. Can I perhaps use that as an specific example to back in the day, external audit used to place reliance on work internal audit did. They don't do that anymore. So when we audit, and remember on this particular example, Mr. Barber has said that they had to do a lot more testing, but at the end of all that testing, they did find that all those journals were appropriately posted. We did that work in advance and we concurred the same thing, but we cannot, and we made recommendations similar to what external audit made. However, it's all linked to the new ERP system. There has been a decision made that where certain weaknesses exist, it wouldn't be best use of our resources to correct those, because we're effectively ending this system very soon. So our focus has been on making sure that those issues don't exist in the new system. My auditors are involved in some of the working groups to get this new system. So all of those issues, for example, on page 32, the IT general controls, they've all been factored into the sort of specification for the new system and how we would tackle that in the new system. So there's very definitely been that focus on correcting and some of the limitations of the current system. We sort of have to accept that those weaknesses exist, and it wouldn't be good use of resource to try and come up with mitigations to, and that at the end of the day, that is a pragmatic view and decision.
And the second question, Mr. Richards.
So just to provide a little bit of assurance with regards to accounting for depreciation, the authority, I'm trying to avoid the term that you used earlier, the authority accounts for depreciation in line with international financial reporting standards, but then we reverse it out to avoid it having an impact on the bottom line. What we replace it by is something known as MRP, our minimum revenue provision, the minimum amount of debt that we have to repay, and that reflects, the charge for the use of assets, in that regard. I've got Matt on standby if you want any further detail, but hopefully that's sufficient.
Microphone, Councillor Cox, please. You're satisfied with the response, I believe. Nobody else has indicated that they wish to ask questions. I would like to go to the recommendations, if I may. There are 3 of them, and for the purposes of the tape, so to speak, are you happy that I read them out and that we take them collectively, or do you want me to take them individually? Collectively? Okay, so it is recommended that A, the committee notes the anticipated audit opinions and findings of the Council's external auditor included as Appendix 1 to this report following the following the audit of accounts 2020-21. B, approves the 2021 financial statement included at Appendix 2. And C, approves the signing of the Statement of Responsibilities and the letter of representation by the Chair of the Audit and Governance Committee and the Section 151 officer once the audit work is complete at the end of March. So if we take those 3 recommendations en bloc, could we go to the vote? All those in favour, please indicate. Thank you very much indeed, members. Before we close this item, could I thank Mr. Richards and Mr. Filmer and the whole of the finance team for the huge amount of work, effort and energy that's been expended in getting us to this point. It's been a difficult year. You're under a lot of pressure anyway, and of course with the new system coming in and the delays that we've experienced for other reasons, I think the committee would wish to register its thanks in the minutes for the work of your team, and if you could convey that thanks to them, please, I think it would be greatly appreciated by all members of Audit and Governance. And separately and in addition, Mr. Barber, thank you very much indeed for the way you have engaged, certainly with officers, with myself, and with members generally in the whole of this process. It's been a bit of a bumpy road for lots of different reasons, but I feel we're making good progress now, and I'm grateful to the work that you've done with us and the spirit in which that work has been taken forward. So thank you and the team at Grant Thornton for that as well.
Thank you, Chair.
So, members, that takes us to what was item 6 on the agenda before I reordered it, which is the review of the Constitution and recommendations of the Constitution Review Working Group. I think, members, you should have received an email earlier in this respect. It was not that long before the start of the meeting, because quite a lot of work's been going on to try and get us to a point where hopefully we can end up with agreement around the substantive issue that was outstanding from the constitutional work at our last committee meeting. And that is broadly around the number of representations to bring applications to the planning committee rather than those decisions being delegated to officers. And I say all of that because I would want members of the committee to know that a lot of effort's been made to try to get us to that point this evening. And my methodology in this is twofold, I suppose. One is to get us to a satisfactory and democratic result that we can all support, that we can do that here on the committee. And secondly, when we take that forward to full council in a couple of weeks' time, we can get behind that recommendation as being something that we all want to see succeed, rather perhaps than what was originally envisaged in terms of changes to the Constitution. I think that would have created a democratic deficit, and I'm very pleased to see the direction of travel as it is coming forward. That is my intention, and I hope that we've responded positively to the points that were being made last time at committee. That's been our intention, to try to get to that point. Now, we've got a number of people here this evening. Some of them may need to introduce themselves. I'm very pleased that online, in respect of the planning issues, we have the chairman of the planning committee, Councillor Kelsey, and Councillor Kelsey I will invite to speak presently to hopefully get his support for a new set of recommendations. In addition to that, though, we have with us this evening a number of officers who've been very deeply involved in these issues, and I'm hoping that we can draw out of this evening their take on how we're going to make this work. I'm going to start, though, with the chairman of the Constitutional Review Working Group, who will introduce the report and the work that has been undertaken so far. Councillor Fear.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for that introduction. I'd just like to start off by thanking the members who attended, in particular Councillor Howell, Councillor Phipps, the Constitutional Working Group, and Councillor Brick as well for attending as well. So we had a really good conversation. It was more of a conversation. I think we came together at the end of it with a really good set of proposals that were taken away. Obviously, there's differing views from officers, members, but I think overall there has been a real strong push to bring things together. And I'm confident this evening that we will have a round two of the outpouring of partnership and collaboration, which I was very proud of. I won't speak too much on this, but I understand we have the three options on the table. Option 2 is the predominant one that members debated at the Constitutional Working Group. Officers had to take that away, draw that up. I've been reassured that the sentiment is still there. Some words have to be changed, so that will be something I'd like members to look at. But obviously we have to look at all three options. So I think without further ado, I will hand over to Mr. Firth to take us through those, and then we will go to members' questions. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Vice Chairman. So we have with us this evening Rob Firth, who's Senior Solicitor. We also have Simon Gould, Senior Planning Officer, been with the authority and its predecessor authority quite a long time, and knows most of how this works in practice over a long period of time, and that is also, I think, quite an important aspect of this. In addition to that, there's been work undertaken by Sam Fox, who isn't with us this evening, and I am grateful for the input that he has had and the flexibilities had in terms of the approach to try to get to something that we can all work with and hopefully we can all support. Mr. Fox is online, but he isn't present with us in the room this evening. So I think I will go next to Mr. Firth to take us to the next stage. Mr. Firth.
Thank you, Chairman. So yes, thank you. So thank you, members. I'm not think it's necessary for me to spend too much time on this particular item. Members had a very good debate on it in relation to the original Audit and Governance Committee. As a result of that, various key issues were identified. They were debated at the working group, which happened last week. And as members can now see from the report before them, 3 options are now being presented. The officer position, which is set out in option 1. The preferred route of the working group, which is option 2. Option 3 is essentially, I guess it's fair to say, a parking option to give more time to think about it. But I do appreciate what the Chairman's already said, that his preferred option would be a consensus approach to take forward now, if that's at all possible. So that's recognised. Chairman, you alluded, well, you specifically referenced, in fact, the document that was circulated earlier. I can share that on screen, but hopefully all the members have had the opportunity to look at it. I do apologise to members that this came so late. We've been working on this up to the last minute, really, and I've been taking the opportunity, obviously, to discuss this with the chairman of the Audit and Governance, and also, obviously, the planning chairman as well. So what you have before you is a document, because I think it's fair to say, hopefully members will agree, that the working group, the focus of that discussion was on the principles rather than necessarily a focus on the specific wording that was coming forward. But what I've tried to do here is just present some options for members to think about, on the basis that members might well be minded to go with the preference of the working group as expressed. So you have the current wording, that is the current wording of the Constitution, right at the top of the 20 representations. You have the principle, which was identified by the working group in 2. You've got option 3, which we as officers would think slightly clearer than option 2. And I think I can explain perhaps the issue with option 2, or the concern we'd have is basically just being able to evidence whether someone is actually residing in the council area. And an example of that perhaps is if they've got a second home here, does that count if they're residing in it or not? So the wording we would prefer, if members want to go down that route, is probably 3. Option 4, Chairman, was simply a recognition that members may wish to take this opportunity, because we haven't really discussed it, as to whether they wanted to clear up any other ambiguity or clarity issues with the current wording. That's option 4. It sits there, Chairman. I'm happy to take members through it, but I appreciate that if you're looking for a consensus position, you may want to just opt perhaps with the 3rd option if members have any issue with the 4th option that's presented.
So I think it might be a bit dangerous to go into that. We could be here and undo the good work that I hope we've done in a practical sense. And members, one of the reasons that I don't think we need more time to consider our recommendations, whatever they are coming out this evening, is that this being the last Audit and Governance meeting of this council, and taking it to the next council, I think it's our duty to get this work completed. I'm very conscious that if we don't, then we're just leaving it lying there for those who are charged with Audit and Governance on the next council. And that doesn't seem to be the right discharge of our duties, I don't think. So I think if there's a positive will, we could find that we're pushing against an open door here to get to a consensus position. I wonder whether it would be helpful if I asked Mr. Fox, Sam Fox, who's online, if he'd like to add anything, because he's authored quite a lot. I've had quite a bit of correspondence, as has the Vice Chairman. Mr. Fox.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to just input into this. I think it's fair to say that we're very keen as officers to support members in the democratic process and to ensure that we've got a position that works both to meet your democratic needs as a committee, but also to make sure that what is put forward as an amendment to the Constitution enables us as officers to deliver that planning process as efficiently as possible. Completely accept and welcome the work of the subcommittee, and I'm also very grateful that we've had the opportunity to continue working on this with the paper that that Robert has just outlined to you. Also very well aware that you're very keen as a committee to wrap up this work today, and we certainly welcome that. I think the couple of sticking points, as if I can put it like that, as I see it, are the issue around whether there's a trigger for representations to planning committee. We know that the trigger of 20 has been somewhat tested and I'd go so far as saying abused by some applicants and some objectors as well. So it's not just applicants; it is a range. It is in rare circumstances, I must admit. So really, the reason why we put forward a potential change to that, and it was something that myself and Councillor Kelsey, as chair of planning committee, were in agreement on, that we need to make sure that we've got a workable solution that isn't going to attract the unwanted attention of people trying to get around it. So that's where we came up with the idea of perhaps removing that entirely. Fully accept as officers the fact that that's not the wish of the subgroup and this committee. So we're very happy to sort of concede on that point. Again, this is something that we've got to make work for all of us, and it isn't a sort of us and them, officers versus members process here at all. But I think we would be happy with the retention of the 20 representations, with the certainly with a bit of tightening up around that, and the wording that we've put forward in the paper that has been circulated and that Robert has put on the screen. I think the other sticking point around that is really about how we trigger that if we do continue with 20, and I have to say, I think that we're getting about 5,000 planning applications a year across BCP. That puts us in the top 10 in terms of volume of cases of councils in the country. So we're a big planning authority. Having said that, the number of applications coming to planning committee is pretty low, which is I say it's low, it's manageable, and we want to keep it at that level where the planning committee are looking at and making decisions quite rightly on the applications that are really important, that there is that democratic accountability there. So we're very clear, we're not looking to restrict that democratic accountability at all. And really it's around whether we can make the representation process work if there is that 20 trigger. And I suppose the question I'm posing to you as a committee is, firstly, can we make that work? Secondly, is it something that we measure, or how do we define 20 representations as valid representations? Are they from anybody within the BCP area or residing in the BCP area? Or is it a more tightly defined, so a geographically defined parameter, such as a radius of a mile or 2 miles, or whatever the committee would choose to decide? My recommendation would be that in terms of us overseeing that, an approach that is for BCP wide and not delineating within that would be the easiest approach for us as officers to be able to administer. But I'm open to the debate and happy to answer any questions on that. So I don't feel I need to add anything further, but I would I'd certainly be keen to know whether Councillor David Kelsey has got any further comments on that, given that he's the chair of Planning Committee. Thank you.
So I'm going to go to Councillor Kelsey next in any case. And then I'd like members to be thinking about the three options in the paper. They're at paragraphs 12, 13 and 14, and to see whether we could, to start with, isolate one of those options as being one we could all rally around. And I think that would be quite helpful if we could do that. So, Councillor Kelsey, as Chairman of the Planning Committee, could we hear your views as well, please?
Yeah, certainly, Chair, and thanks for the opportunity, and thank you, Sam, for what you've done on this already, along with Robert. It's really helpful. I think we do need to make a change. we can't just sit back with what we've had. Sam's quite correct. We have had problems with the amount of reps that have just been substantially high for such a small application in some cases. And when we've looked at those, they've been from far, far and wide, and they really wouldn't have had any effect on the lives of some of those people where those representations came from. I mean, we've had them, just for an example, so we've had an application in Southbourne, we've had representations from people as far away as Ferndown and St Ives and things like that. They really don't or shouldn't have the opportunity to cause work for officers and planning board when they're so far away from that application and it's not directly affecting them. I think having a BCP wide address, I mean, as much as I like that rather than getting rid of the 20 altogether, I still think that in some cases that's too far, it's too wide, because a BH postcode goes a long way. So if we're just relying on saying it, as long as it has a BH postcode, I think that's going to be too much. And I quite like the idea, if I'm being quite honest, of having a mile around from that thing. I know that's going to cause far more work for the officers, and I really appreciate that. And Sam will know that I'm not one to trying to give the officers extra work to do. I'm all about managing the officers' time, which is why we don't have them back in the room for planning and things. They could be doing much better things with their time. But Chairman, I honestly think that having it a mile from the development or from the application would be a much better way of doing this, and I think it'll be a great way forward. And we would get more local representations, and rather than just a developer or an applicant or anybody making a mockery of what we try to do.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Kelsey. I've got a few people who wish to speak. I didn't know, Mr. Firth, did you want to come back?
Chairman, if I may, just on a couple of points. First of all, we're obviously focusing on the 20 rep situation at present. I should mention that the note I circulated to members will know I also picked up a minor change to the call-in process as well to clarify a point on that. So we want members to lose sight of that when you consider the options. Secondly, as far as the 1 mile situation, and I think any distance, setting aside the need to measure it all, I think probably if members wanted to go down that route, I'd probably have to ask members to give us officers an opportunity to come up with some wording for that. And I'm thinking, for example, if you've got an application which could be quite large, from what point do I measure the mile? Do I measure it from the centre of the application point? Do I measure it from the boundary of the application site? And these might seem minor issues, but the reality is if you've got an application that covers, I don't know, a quarter of a hectare or something, that could bring in a number of residences. So I think we'd need to think slightly about that, Chairman. So again, if members wanted to go with the principle, that's fine, but I'd have to ask, I think, if members would be prepared to give officers a bit of time just to come up with the wording, so when we went to full council, you see the wording we think could address that point. That would be my concern with that.
Yes, I understand the legal implications of that. But I think what we want to make sure is that whatever we come up with as a recommendation has democratic accountability, but serves the planning process in terms of genuine representations to those most closely affected. And I think in a previous discussion, it was said, well, of course, this will mean there's a great deal more work for planning officers. I think probably the reverse could be true, in the sense that what we're trying to do is to get those genuine ones in front of the planning committee. And if in so doing, that means that when we get to 20 reps on an application, then it is closely monitored. Nothing else up to that point needs to be closely monitored because it's academic. And I think once it's past that point, then it will be much easier to measure. So it won't be the case, I suspect, that many will have exactly 20 when it comes down to it. I suspect that they would probably have more than that. And if they had less than that, they wouldn't qualify regardless of what the geographic boundary was. So I think we just need to exercise a little bit of common sense about this as well, to get that balance right. And that might be something Mr. Fox and yourself would like to think about, so you can come back to that point perhaps later on in the discussion.
Chairman, we'll do so.
And if at any stage, Mr. Gould, you feel you would like to add to this debate, then please indicate, unless there's something you'd like to say by way of introduction now anyway, given your experience.
Yeah, no, thank you, Chairman, and good evening, members. I personally can see some issues around the sort of the nuts and bolts of the administration of the
a 1 mile radius. I take your point, Chairman, that you wouldn't necessarily have to start concerning yourself with that until at such point that you approach that threshold of 20. I do have reservations around that in terms of the administrative side of that, and also the scope for error. And to sort of echo what Mr. Firth has said, if you have a particularly large site, we'd need to understand at what point we're taking the sort of the pinpoint to then measure out the mile radius. From my point of view, I think if members were going down the option 2 route, I think I would probably be more of an advocate for the BCP wide constraint, albeit that does come with some limitations itself in terms of its effectiveness about what we're trying to achieve. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Gould. So before we get into members' participation, I asked you to think about the 3 options at paragraphs 12, 13 and 14, and the work that's gone into this would indicate that it's been driven towards option 2. Would there be agreement that we can exclude perhaps the other 2 options? Is this going in the direction that we want to go? I'm trying to be efficient here. So is there anybody who would object to doing that? Are you indicating, Councillor Cox, that you agree, or that? Could you put your microphone up?
I have a problem. I just wanted to be persuaded otherwise, really.
Could you express your problem?
The problem is if somebody lives in the edge of Highcliffe, they could effectively, their neighbours could be across the boundary, and therefore they wouldn't be able to object, and that seems wrong to me. That's my problem with the Bournemouth Council area.
Who would like to have a go at answering that? Is that for you, Mr. Fox?
Certainly can be. Yes. This was one flaw that we really, where you put any delineation around any boundary, there's going to be somebody who loses out. So I think the other way around it would be not to mention anything about the BCP boundary, but actually to go with, as you've already suggested, Chairman, a radius, whether that's 1 mile, 2 miles, whatever you choose as a committee. Then if we take out any reference to being a BCP resident, then that really is making sure that it is those who are closely affected by something if they fall outside the boundary. So that would be a workable solution for us. I think that there are some slight reservations from officers about how about the administrative burden of that. But and again, as Mr. Firth has indicated, I think it's important that we get that right. I would be happy going with if that's the decision of the committee, then I think it would have to be from the outer limit of the boundary. So the boundary is delineated by a red line. So there'd be a bit of calculation to do from that. I think if it was to be from the centre of it, that would cause problems because it's not always easy to find the centre of a site. But I think it needs to be something that is defensible if people feel aggrieved that we haven't interpreted our policy correctly and that we end up in the complaints process and potentially also with the Ombudsman. So I think we need to make that very clear, but I could see that we can make that work, albeit it probably isn't the first choice that officers would recommend, but happy to go with that if that's the feeling of the committee. Thank you.
So are we able to rally around option 2 and then be speaking just to that or to the other options as well? Does that satisfy you, Councillor Cox? Sorry, I then want to take the speakers who've indicated in the order they've indicated, but Councillor Phipps.
Yeah, I mean, option 2 is what I'm going to talk about.
So I will come to you. I've got 2 other speakers who've indicated some time ago. Can we then exclude options 1 and 3? Yes, is that? Sorry, so Councillor Cox, does that satisfy you from what you've heard? Thank you very much. So we're just talking to option 2 and trying to get that worked up to something that is going to be gaining the support of everybody on the committee that we can then take forward as a recommendation to full council. That's my intention, and I'm sure we can achieve that. Councillor Brooke.
Fine, thank you, Chair. As you know, I was fairly strongly opposed to this totally at the last working group meeting for a number of reasons. However, looking at point 4 and 2.2.8 in the email that we received earlier this evening, I welcome the setting out under the 6 subparagraphs, subsections. It does make it much clearer, but I still have reservations over A and D, and would like to investigate those a little bit further, if I may. The first A, of course, is where we've been talking about just recently. There's another issue that we haven't considered, because it's referring to residents. Now, I'm aware that there have been, if you like, scam letters sent in where the residence is in the right place, but the occupant of that residence isn't. In other words, it's a fraudulent letter. So there's an issue over just using residence, because someone could use a false name, i.e. someone who lives outside the area using an address inside, because we have come across residents when we've spoken to them saying, well, I never sent a letter in. You know, I live in this house. That person doesn't live in this house. So that it's not just the resident's position, it's the resident within the residence that is important. And that needs to be checked through very carefully. And D is fairly similar. Let's suppose there are 20 letters coming in of objection, and therefore you're going to potentially call it in. But 2 of those are from the same address, husband and wife. So you're going to say, using residence only, that brings it down to 19, no call in. But those 2 letters might be totally different. One raising one significant point, the other raising another point. Therefore, you have got 2 different letters, valid reasons, substantive planning reasons, but you're discounting one of them because it's from the same address. So you've got a problem there. And that was my issue before. I've come across a situation where it was just the addresses, but actually the letters were different inside, but it was discounted, and therefore wouldn't come to committee under that situation. Now that makes it it means every single letter's got to be looked at and judged. Yes, does it come from the right location? And B, has it got a significant difference from another one in that same place? Because you cannot disenfranchise people on the basis of residence only in planning. Those are my 2 key points. If those can be resolved, I'm happy to support that.
Thank you, Councillor Brooke. I suppose more of a legal issue, isn't it, Mr. Firth?
Chairman, yeah, so a few observations have been made to try and help. I'm not sure there's an easy way to get around the actual people who reside in a property and how we could ever verify that easily. I'm trying to think as I sit here, and I'm just not sure we'll have the information. You can identify where a residence is situated, but who actually lives in a property? Well, I'm thinking, could you access, I don't know, council tax records? That might not have all the information that's relevant. Could you access electoral records? I'm not sure that would have all the information, even assuming you could access it, and whether it would be open for the council to search for this purpose. So I think that's a difficulty with that. And which is why I think there's always a compromise with what we're talking about here, and what we're trying to do is strike a balance. But I think if you end up with looking at this sort of issue of residences, however you do it, whether it's 1 mile or some other geographic assessment, we have to come up with wording which I think is reasonably accessible and can reasonably be assessed without too much difficulty. And I would have concern, as I sit here this moment, thinking about how you could actually identify the true occupants of a property. As far as the point regarding the coming from the same address, I think all I can say on that is that's what your current your current restriction says, as is apparent from the document that has been circulated, it's got to be from separate addresses. It wouldn't, of course. I think we need to be clear. This doesn't disenfranchise someone from making a representation. The representation can still be made, and it would fall to be considered as part of the application. What we're talking about here is just a trigger which would force it to come to planning committee, not that officers wouldn't have to consider any representation that was validly made. So I think we need to keep that in mind. There is a difference there, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Perth. Can I move on from those points, Councillor Brooke, or did you want to come back?
Like to come back on that last point.
Okay, thank you.
I can imagine how people would feel if they were aware that, and they can easily see from the number of letters on the online, that it hasn't come to committee, yet there are 20 letters there, and there were 2 from the same address. They were 2 different. One of those people is going to say, why hasn't my letter been taken into account? But why hasn't my objection been taken? Oh yeah, yes, you can consider it at committee, but that's not, well, you can't consider it at committee. It has not come to committee. And yet you're saying there should be 20, there've got to be 20 representations with substantive planning reasons. You've got 20, but you've only got 19 residences. So you're saying one of those is disqualified. You've got to get round that problem.
So if I can go back to Mr.
And I don't think the answer from Mr. Fripp, it does actually resolve it. It simply puts one of them. Oh, it will be considered by the case officer. But it should have come to committee because it was a different reason.
So just to float an idea, if the wording were modified to say something to the effect of if it's from the same residence, it would have to raise fresh planning issues. Would that help us get to a point? I don't believe in practice this is going to happen that often compared to everything else. So we're not opening the floodgates. I'm just sort of wondering whether wording to that effect would get round this problem and address it in the sense that then if they are fresh planning issues, and they've all got to be on planning grounds anyway, whether that might satisfy and get to that right balance. Any comment, Mr. Fair?
I think, Chairman, my comments would be, first of all, just to reiterate the point, what we're talking about here is something that already exists, so that you already have this provision in place that does this, and I'm not aware it's caused major issues, but I accept it may well have caused some issues which I'm not aware of, so I accept that. I think the second point I'd make is I think members got to ask themselves, what is the purpose behind this 20 call it? So if I've got a family of 5 people living in a property, do members want the situation where every one of those members of family can submit their own application that counts towards 5 of the 20? Or are they talking about households? Is that what they're looking at? So I think there's that difference of interpretation. Are you saying it's a representation of the household, or are you giving the opportunity for every member of a household to make a representation to count towards the 20 trigger? I think that's a judgment call. And I think if you're trying to differentiate between material planning issues, I'm not sure that takes us a lot further forward, Chairman, because I suspect in truth most applications have more than one material planning issue that is relevant to it, off the top of my head. And so just saying, well, one person therefore will focus on one material issue and the next person can focus on another one, I don't think it adds very much to the debate, I'm afraid, Chairman. I think it could be just as easy to, I don't want to use the word abuse, Chairman, because that's not what we're talking about here, but I think it could just, I'm not sure it would add anything to the debate. Let me leave it like that, Chairman.
Yes, I think I would address the issue that because it's in the current policy doesn't necessarily mean it should be retained and taken forward, because what we're doing is trying to get something that's fit for purpose, that suits the democratic deficit that might otherwise result, and isn't something that come the next council cycle is brought back to audit and governance to go through the whole procedure again. I think that's something we'd all want to see avoided if possible, as we would it becoming a protracted debate at council when our recommendations go forward. So we need to bear that in mind as well.
Chairman, I apologise. I wasn't suggesting that wasn't the case. Then I think, can I just take it back to this point? I think it is really this question as to what members see the purpose of this particular provision being for. And if you don't want it, if you want to give, say, 5 members of the same household the opportunity to submit 5 representations to count, you just remove the words from separate addresses. That's presumably the solution.
Mr. Fox.
Thank you. I'd this discussion, and I think it highlights some of the sort of practicalities of how we need to address this. I do wonder whether, in actual fact, we need to fall back on a potential solution for this if we are to keep the separate households proviso in there, whether we might choose to add a kind of catch-all, but where in the event that you've got separate members of the same household putting materially different points forward, it could be left to the discretion of the chair and the director of planning and destination and their discretion to decide that the item does come to planning committee. Now, if in the I suspect rare event that this was to happen, I'd be more than happy to have that discussion with the chair and err on the side of democratic caution and bring that to committee. So I think that there's a point of reasonableness here, and I think we all need to play our part in that. So if some form of words that Mr. Firth can come up with that are legally robust enough, then I'd be very happy for that to be put forward as an alternative to overcome this position. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Fox. That's, I hope, universally accepted as being very helpful. Thank you. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. I think that suggestion that's come in there is a very useful one. I certainly can't remember a time in the past couple of years since I've been Vice Chair of Planning that has ever been an issue that I've seen. I certainly haven't ever heard of any residents complaining that theirs was disregarded because it was from the same household. And also I was worried in the fact that we have had examples of where before that proviso was in there of one household where businesses have gotten all their staff to write in from one address, which again skews the numbers in the other way. So I think that catch-all at the end there is a very useful one, but I think it's also a good time to make the point that this is only discussing one way in which applications come to committees. You know, if an application is generating that kind of public interest, then I think the ward councillors hopefully would be involved and could call it in at any case. This is just for the catch-all. You know, this is just for the catch-all trigger at the end. And if a resident is as aware as they would need to be of that proviso, you would hope they'd be aware of their ward councillor, and that's where we have to step in. But I think with that proviso put in, we've covered all the possible issues, and I think I'd be very much supportive of what's in there now, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Johnson. That's helpful. Thank you, Councillor Phipps.
Thank you very much.
Well, I've kept you waiting.
It's all right. First of all, I'd like to address the issue of this mile. I don't think that's workable at all. It's not far enough either. Quite frankly, you can get applications that, I could quote you one, which I won't because I'm not going to go into specifics in my ward. It's going to be on its 3rd application soon. 2 have been thrown out. But at the end of the day, the things that are being put forward on this site will affect people much further away than a mile away because of traffic issues and things like that. A mile is just nothing, absolutely nothing. It's just not far enough. I couldn't support that at all. If you were going to do that, you might as well say, oh, well, let's just do Christchurch, or let's just do Bournemouth, or let's just do Hull. You know, where are you going to? Is this going to end? So no, I couldn't do. I'm sorry, I couldn't do the support a mile. Going back to the residences, I mean, how does it work at the moment? We don't have any issues, and I don't hear people complaining, oh, my representation wasn't counted or whatever, and we do get 2 or 3 people from a household perhaps putting their views forward. And why shouldn't they? They're affected, aren't they? They live there, you know, they're individuals. It's not just a house, it's the people that live there that are affected, and that's the whole point of this, isn't it? and surely it works okay at the moment. So are we trying to change something that doesn't need changing? The other issue of fresh planning issues, I don't think that's, people don't understand that sort of thing. They have a view, they live there. How's that going to affect me? It's going to affect me because of this. And people next door might have the same issue. So you're going to say the two people in one house have to put forward different issues, but the man next door can put forward the same issue as the man in the house. That doesn't seem right to me either. It just seems to be getting so complicated. Why are we getting so complicated with this? And why would we then have to give more work to rely on the chairman of the committee and an officer have a look and say, oh, is that all right, or is that one not all right? Can we not just go with the representations as they are now, but go for 20 with it? And then you do, I believe you do need a geographic line, and if it's got to be BCP, if you can't do it as 3 individual areas, because you'd still end up with what Councillor Cox has put forward, someone who lives on the edge of Christchurch, but they're affected in Bournemouth. So if you're going to go for your mile, you'll have to put it outside of the BCP area, I expect. And that would probably be that would probably cover it, that you delineate it from the BCP boundary for a mile. Because certainly in my ward, I've got people in like Parley, which is in Dorset, that would be affected, and they are affected by things that happen in my ward. But you don't want to sort of alienate them. But somebody that lives in Basingstoke, which is other things that have happened in my ward with certain developers that then have addresses all over the place that write in, no, thank you very much. I mean, I think that's ridiculous. But we've got to have a bit of common sense here. And at the moment, all these things that are coming forward, to me, it's just making it very, very complicated. Why can't we leave the situation as it is, but 20 representations and then put the geographic area on it, perhaps with a mile outside it? That's my thoughts on it. Thanks.
I thought that's what we were driving towards, actually. So what I thought we were beginning to edge towards in terms of consensus wasn't complicated. It was very straightforward, it seems to me, and it eradicated the difficulty of all and sundry manipulating on some rare occasions the representation to get it to committee, and thereby the mile as a radius from the red line wouldn't be looking at the boundary of BCP, it would be looking at the distance from the red line, which seemed to me to incorporate all of those affected. Is a huge number, potentially a huge number of households. I would perhaps wonder if there were major traffic issues, presumably, if you think of the number of households within a radius of 1 mile of a site, is going to mean that representations will come in aplenty if there's a major problem anyway, because necessarily they will be affected as much as those further away. So I'm not sure that's quite the issue that you're explaining to us. Could I go to Councillor Howell, and then there's 2 members who've indicated they'd like to come back. Councillor Howell.
Yeah, I agree with you, Chair. I mean, you know, a mile's radius is easily enough, because if it's an issue, then there will be people within that mile radius who get you up to the 20. I don't think we should be in a situation where we're saying that everybody locally is happy with a situation, but because somebody wants to drive there from miles away, then they should have some kind of influence over it. You know, I can disagree with Councillor Brooks' proposal as well, really, because I feel that fundamentally we're talking about the enjoyment of a property. You know, people living in that property, you know, are not always going to live there. The property is likely to be there much longer than they are, and therefore it doesn't really matter how many people are in the property. It's how many properties I think are influenced negatively by the scheme potentially. I think the solution to the 1 mile, how do you calculate it, is quite easy. You say 1 mile from the postcodes and you put that into Google or whatever, but the officers include every objection that actually comes from 1.1 miles or something like that, and therefore you can be certain that you've got a margin for error there in case it's challenged. And then finally, I'd say that Sam said that at the beginning that this is a relatively rare occasion where we get over 20, and then Councillor Kelsey said it happens quite a lot. So I'm a bit unsure as to whether we are going very deep down a rabbit hole that we don't need to go down. But yeah, those are my points. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Howell. I'm going to go to those who've indicated a second time. Then I'm going to go back to the officers to try and help us pull this together, which I'm sure the officers are more than capable of doing. No pressure at all. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. It was just to reiterate one thing that I think is leading a couple of members possibly astray in their concerns, is just a reminder that this is not the only method by which things end up at planning committee. If there is an application in Christchurch that has an effect on traffic as far away as Bournemouth or a Poole, you could imagine that it would probably be classed as a major application, would as such be very much more likely to end up at planning committee anyway. So I think that the provision of the 1 mile radius is more than enough to capture the usually the minor applications that rely on the 20 representations to come into planning committee. The major ones often end up there anyway because they draw the attention of the ward councillors. They are also brought there by the planning officers anyway, as a matter of course. So I think we're all pushing, I think, at two sides of the same door here. And I think I'll leave it there, Chairman. Thank you.
Councillor Brooke, you wanted to come back.
Yes, I mean, I would like the inclusion somewhere that relates to the chairman's and senior officers' discretion, because as it's set out now, looking at it more closely, what D is doing is saying a representation isn't a representation. Because what you're saying in the preamble is applications where there have been 20 or more representations from third parties. So we've got 20 or more, but now we then go to residences, and because several of those are coming from same things, you're then saying, well, but we're disallowing those. We're not even counting them as representations. I get the point about, well, the case officer can still consider those points being made, but we're introducing a statement there that effectively negates the first one. It's already there, representations. So I will support this if D is removed, but we still have a statement somewhere about with the discretion of the senior officer and chairman. But I may not get any seconders, and if it stays in, I shall vote against it, but it will get passed. So,
well, I've got no positive response that will get passed. I want to try and do this to repeat myself by some sort of consensus from audit and governance to stand credibility at council, because what I don't want, none of us surely wants, is to have the usual lengthy debate over every last word that's within it when we get to full council. That doesn't strike me that we will have done our job as well as we might. Before I go back to officers, did you just indicate Councillor Cox? You did. Councillor Cox.
Only as far as I'm sitting here listening to an alternative point of view, so I'm trying to reflect on that. That a mile does, in normal circumstances, a mile does seem perfectly adequate. Well, having picked up Councillor Phipps today, a mile from her perspective is not. It's because she lives on the boundary, lots of forests, so a mile actually is quite a short distance when you're trying to collect 20 signatures.
Well, but if it has wider implications, as Councillor Johnson has said twice now, there are other checks and balances to bring applications to the planning committee other than the number of representations. There is a bit of discretion in there. So if there's an application that is in the public interest to come to the planning committee, then that is one of the criteria. Of course, in the case that you've just alluded that Councillor Phipps has whispered in your ear, the ward councillor has that opportunity anyway. And if that were the case and they couldn't rely on the 20, then presumably the ward councillor would call it in any case. I think what we're trying to do is to find a mechanism that suits the democratic process for those residents who want to make representation. And if anything does slip through, because it doesn't conform to any of the other ways of getting to planning committee, that is just another way of doing it. And the other advantage it has is, I suppose, that if the ward councillor's view is contrary to those representations, then it still has a chance of getting to the planning committee anyway. I'm sure we can all think of instances of that. I think that's probably where it's got the most validity of all, frankly. So I think we just sort of see this as just one segment of the cake. It isn't the whole cake, would be my view. I'm just trying to give a little bit of extra time to either Mr. Firth or to Mr. Fox to do their part of this.
Chairman,
who wants to go first?
Well, Chairman, I'll have a go first.
Okay.
In the sense that I'm going to do it in bits, if I may, Chairman.
We'll give, that will give Mr. Fox more time to think.
Chairman, I think perhaps the easiest tweak, if members wanted to go with that, would be the 1 mile radius point, where I think, Chairman, you could probably deal with that by amending. I don't know if members have got, well, from the report, if they look at the report, Chairman, it's probably easier because I'm going to have to talk to this and it's going to get a bit confusing if members are trying to listen to what I'm saying without something in front of them, I fear. So if they go to the report, and you'll see, and I'm going to find the bit which you can look at, an appendix 2 of that report. And you'll see 2.2.8, which is just below page 14. So if you find page 14, move on to page 15, and 2.2.8 is just below that, Chairman. So if I can start to that point, and I can now talk to where I think you could tweak it. So taking that as the base wording, Chairman, I think you could probably tweak it as far as the 1 mile radius is say applications where there have been 20 more representations from third parties that are identified in the representation as coming from a residence within 1 mile of any point from the application site red line boundary received within the initial or any subsequent notification period. So I think that would pick up the 1 mile point, Chairman, fairly simply. I think when you then start talking, and I'm not actually sure if there's any consensus on this yet, I have to be honest, about trying to bring in chairman's discretions and council and director's discretions, that where it becomes even more complicated because it's quite hard to build that in, I'm afraid, while trying to work on it here and now. I have some wording I can read out to you, Chairman, if you want to hear it.
Well, you might want to chance your arm. Go on, Mr. Firth.
So, Chairman, with apologies in advance, because this is complicated, I will say, I'll read it out. Applications where there have been 20 or more representations from third parties that are identified in the representation as coming from a residence within 1 mile of any point from the application site red line boundary received within the initial or subsequent notification period, based on material planning issues that are contrary to the recommendation that in the case of more than, the contrary to the recommendation, and then add in the following. Provided that in the case of more than one representation coming from the same residence, then each such representation may count towards the 20 representations, but only if, in relation to that application, if in the opinion of the relevant senior planning officer in consultation with the chairman of planning, it is considered that it raises one or more material planning reasons that have not been raised within any other representation received from that residence. Chairman, I think that's what members have asked for. I'm not saying it's the best wording, but I think that's what you asked for.
That might result in common sense prevailing, actually. Yeah. I don't know. Thank you very much for the effort. I appreciate it. And I hope other members of the committee do too. Did you want to come back, Mr. Fox, on the basis of what Mr. Firth said, or anything fresh you'd like to introduce?
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. I didn't need more time because I'd got it in my head, and now I've just heard what what Mr. Firth has said, and I just want to I'm getting some wording right, and I'm going to put it in the chat in a minute. But I think if we can keep it as close to the the wording that is already set out in that paper that's been circulated to you that we've been discussing under paragraph 2.2.8. And I've been working on this as we've been talking, so excuse me for bumbling through this, but I think if we can say there that applications where there have been 20 or more representations from third parties, provided that to count towards that number, a representation must, and then we've got A, which is identify on the representation that has come from a residence which is believed by the case officer, brackets, at the time of deciding whether the matter needs to go to planning committee, close brackets, a residence within 1 mile of any point from the application site red line boundary received within the initial or any subsequent notification period. So that's pretty much what Mr. Firth has said as criteria A. Then I think we can, and this is where I'm thinking on my feet, even though I'm sat down, would be where there is more than one representation coming from the same residence. That's where I think we now need to put in some wording, and I'd be looking to Mr. Firth to help with this, that's really clear about it will be at the discretion of the chairman or chair of planning committee and the director of planning and destination to decide whether that is counted as a separate representation, and whether in fact the application needs to come to planning committee. I think words to that effect should cover that, and then I would suggest we leave the remaining criteria in there that are already in as 2.2.8. Does that help? And do you want me to put that in the chat?
I think it does help, Mr. Fox. Let's also though keep a sense of perspective. This isn't going to be a very often repeated set of circumstances, is it? That's the point. It's going to be very rare that the figure of 20 is absolutely spot on. It either hasn't got to 20 or it's exceeded it, is the greater likelihood. It makes it therefore much easier for that discretion point to be enacted where it's required, it seems to me. And so I think that wording is fine in the way that you've explained it. Could I perhaps hear back from the chairman of the planning committee? Are you happy with the direction we're going in here? Is this going to fulfil what's required and help in your job in determining democratically whether applications get to the committee? Councillor Kelly.
Yes, Chairman, and thank you for the opportunity. I think, to be fair, that extra section that Sam was talking about being in conjunction with myself and himself as head, or whoever is chair at the time, is something that is going to be so rarely used, it's almost not worried about. Because you're quite right, Chairman. I've never known it where we've only had exactly 20 representations to call something in. Invariably, it is, if it's such a contentious planning application, it is always more than the 20, and it would automatically come to the planning board without having to worry about whether or not we've had more than one from any one particular address or not. So I think the wording that Mr. Fox has put in place there will be quite adequate, and I would be fully supportive of that, Chairman. Thank you.
Well, that's got somebody on board. You don't have a vote though, unfortunately, on this committee, but it shows a direction of travel in terms of its workability, I think, which is what we're after, isn't it? So, any other members want to come back with any points, particularly new points? Vice Chairman.
Thank you, Chair. I feel like we're closer than we think we are regarding this, just after hearing from both previous officers. I think that it covers the valid points, which I was in agreement with from Councillor Brooke. I think that's covered those items on that, and then that fail-safe from the discretion from the officers of the chair. Those are the only points that have come up from the working group. So everything else has been covered from that point. It's just settling those two items, which I think we've done now. So I would be happy to support that, with obviously the wording being finalised. Thank you, Chair.
So is that position likely to be something that this committee is going to support? Is anybody going to be voting against it or sitting on their hands? Because I've got a proposal to make around how we can do that so that we all know exactly the wording and the detail of that wording. Councillor Phipps.
I'm a bit conflicted here. I don't like the mile at all. I won't oppose it, but I might sit on my hands. That's how I feel at the moment. I can just see, certainly in areas of my ward, where certain things will come in a certain place, and a mile is absolutely nothing, and people will be affected further away from there. Not just on traffic, but they will be affected, and they will feel disenfranchised. That's what I think.
Will you not, though, in those circumstances, be calling it in a ward council anyway?
Yeah, but I just think people will think, well, what's the point? Because nobody will take any notice of it.
Well, you'll take notice, won't you, as ward councillor?
Well, yeah, of course I will.
So surely that satisfies your concern.
To a degree, it's just this mile. I don't know. I'm thinking about it.
Well, think along slightly different lines. For those of us who have coastal wards, all right, within that, if it's down near the beach, we lose half of that anyway, because we have a semicircle. So, you know, I mean, you're never going to get, I make the point because you're never going to get a perfect outcome. This is a highly developed conurbation of 3 towns, and with thousands living within a mile's radius, and if there's anything that is going to be missed by the other criteria for getting it to the planning committee, the ultimate sanction is for the ward councillor just to write in on the form and get it called in. So I kind of think that overrules everything in terms of democratic accountability. And at that stage, of course, then those residents who, let's say, are objecting against an officer's recommendation are going to have the opportunity to appear at the planning committee once you've called it in to make their views known to the committee. That seems to me to be democracy at work in the best way that we can make it work with such a diverse community.
Okay, you may have persuaded me.
Well, that's almost faint praise, isn't it? So, if we were to agree this, members, would it be advisable, do you think, if we got Mr. Firth and Mr. Fox to cast their legal and planning minds over the exact wording and to circulate that to members of this committee, obviously not this evening. I think you'd want to reflect upon it, and I suspect that Mr. Gould will have some input into this too. Sorry to have disappointed you about the mile, but I thought that's where we were going. And then I don't know how quickly you could do that, how soon we could expect to see it.
I mean, Chairman, we can certainly start discussing it tomorrow, as far as I'm concerned.
Right. Well, tomorrow's Friday. Ideal world, we'd have it in time for the contemplation over the weekend. And I think if that were possible, and I think it probably is, then could you have in that email to us all how members who still think that the odd word needs to be tweaked, whether they should send it back to you for consideration, so that if there were a final version, that could be completed on Monday, perhaps.
Chairman, I think what I will do, and I'm sorry, I'm speaking without knowing the availability of Mr. Gould or Mr. Fox at this moment, but I can certainly look at it on Friday, and I suspect that both of them will probably try and make themselves available to have that discussion. Chairman, I've just heard that.
Yes,
well, so we will try and look at it on Friday.
That is what was behind my thinking. That was why the speed. It's midday it goes out, I think, the agenda for full council. There is a little flexibility. So that's why I was edging towards Monday, because we've got to get this to work as far as democratic services are concerned. So if you can do that, are members going to be able to access their emails and respond in a timely way so that we can get the agenda for full council out within the statutory time limit? Will anybody have a problem with that? No? Well, that would be a major achievement if we could do all of that. Is your availability all right, Mr. Fox, to help make that happen?
I've just had a message from the chairman
I've
saying
just
accept
put
to
a message in the chat, Chairman, saying that that's absolutely fine.
And could I ask you please to make sure that you include the chairman of the planning committee in all of this? The vice chairman of the planning committee is on this committee, so that is seen as being done already. I don't think there's anybody else who should be involved in that.
Chairman, I was only going to ask, would you be available if we have to speak to you directly? Because obviously I think your guidance would be of assistance. So if we reach a point where we think it's got some wording, I'm almost tempted to think, right, well, as circulating, if we could speak to you, that might be helpful if you're available.
Yes, certainly. I have meetings on Monday, but I will come back to you if I'm in them at the time, as soon as I can, and by midday at the latest.
That's the target, Chairman. That's what we'll work for.
All right. So, members, can we agree to that? Please don't ask me to read out what it is we're agreeing to until you receive it, hopefully tomorrow. But you all understand, I think. So can we agree on that?
Agreed.
Thank you very much, members. Thank you for getting us there. My final comment is, when we get to full council, if it's necessary, please could members bear in mind that it would be hugely helpful to the reputation of audit and governance and to the democratic process if you can speak in support of what it is that we've gone through in terms of the detail and the conclusion that we've reached. Because what I don't want is for this to take more time than it needs to at full council, and the whole debate is then repeated ad infinitum. I don't think that does it. I don't think that does anybody any good at all. Members, thank you very much indeed. I propose that we have a very short comfort break before we get into the other issues. I would ask you to bear in mind they're all important issues, of course they are, but it is 8:30. We've been at this now for 2.5 hours, and I would hope that we can finish at a reasonable hour. So can we take a 5-minute comfort break and then reconvene? Thank you, members. Welcome back. I'm reconvening the meeting at 20:40 hours. That takes us now on to item 8 on the agenda, which is information governance update. And I think we should have Nigel Channer, the team leader of information governance online.
Good evening.
Mr. Channer, good evening to you.
Good evening.
Could you briefly introduce your report to the committee, please?
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, committee. To bring forward the report this evening, it's from the Information Governance. It's an update to the committee from the previous report. And if I could just highlight, if I may, some of the points from the report that indicate that the Information Governance Board has continued its work, and it provides a useful overarching oversight with senior members of officers who attend and have the oversight for information governance within their areas. And that's beginning to work rather well. We also had in this year as well a review from the internal audit, and my colleagues there in audit were will be bringing forward and present a completed report to the about information governance, to the audit committee in July. But you'll notice that what they've said is that of the 11 medium recommendations, 5 of those have been fully implemented, and actions to implement the others are well underway. Throughout the year, what we've seen in terms of, and it's kind of highlighted in the performance information that attaches this, is that there's a sort of a steady trend of FOI inquiries that are coming and the responses to that. So there's largely no change there. You can see item 5 talks about, you can see the 80%, 83, 82, sort of hovering around that as a response time going forward. And then in terms of the team remain fully staffed and sort of consistent there. So those are some of the main points in that regard. And some of the things that we're looking at is, from the team's point of view, is that they're looking to work with the information asset advisors in the different sections. So today, for example, there was a workshop with those officers, and we're working to give them skill sets and talk about how we can work more effectively. There's also some work progressing as well in terms of seeing whether we can find a more advanced case management system, which would be a corporate solution going across various teams and allowing us to provide a better customer experience. So we're quite keen about that, and we're working on bringing forward a paper which will be presented to the management team for law and governance. So those are some of the highlights I'd like to bring forward to the committee chair.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Channer. Members, do you have any questions for Mr. Channer? Councillor Brooke.
Fine, thank you, Chair. Taking the 2021 figures where you've got all the percentage response rates, there are several what appear to be service areas where it is quite difficult to understand what's actually happening, because there has been, in some instances, a significant decrease in the number of requests and also a significant decrease in the response rate. Now, it would seem to me that if you've got a significant drop in the number of requests, you would actually be able to have a much higher response rate because you've got fewer to deal with. And yet there are several in that table where you've got dramatic reductions, and yet in the numbers, for instance, DNS in Q2 had 21 requests with a 91% response, which is above the national average. In the next quarter, they get 3 requests and only have a 67% response. Now, I know the small number percentages get exaggerated, but there are several in amongst those figures which, to me, raise issues and questions. So are you actually looking at those and trying to find out what is causing those particular changes and dramatic drops way below even our average, which in turn is below the national average or the national target.
Mr. Channer.
Absolutely. So one of the things that we're doing in the Information Governance Board is that those issues are highlighted, and the team, we meet up with those areas where we see that happening, and those points are identified during the course of our discussions. I can't think of those exactly, but you know, as you say, there are those, because they're such low numbers, they do skew. So in terms of statistics, it's not helpful. But in terms of being able to get the numbers up to a high standard, if we can fix those things, then it's an easy win. So certainly it's something that we, as the Information Governance Board, are looking at, and we have gone to different sections throughout the course of the year and spoken to those teams about where we think some of the weaknesses are, and finding out, you know, what's happened. And they can be, you know, things where they've had to go elsewhere, and they've had the last minute to resolve them. So, you know, whilst they might have, and some of those occasions can be, the response time is 20 days, but they actually answered it on the 21st day. And so, but that's not helpful. We need to make sure that we answer those FOIs in the right time. So it is something that we're addressing through the Information Governance Board and as the IG team.
Councillor Cox.
Yeah, just looking at those statistics, that it does appear that children's services, certainly for the last 2 years, has been particularly poor. And is there a particular reason why it's dropped off so much?
They do have some. Sorry, yes, they as a section, you're quite right. It's something that we've noticed, and again, we've met up with those sections, and we do have some change in senior management team around that, taking seriously, and something that we are working with them as information governance team to bring the response rate back up again to the right levels. So it is something that we're addressing, and so we're hoping that you know, for example, the next AIG meeting is coming up soon, and we're preparing for that. So part of these reports go to that, and we speak to these points. So that it is an ongoing discussion, and the IG team are prepared to help where we can to get those responses. And one of the things we're looking at is having a case management system that enables us to, one, be able to allocate those queries at an earlier stage. So, for example, wherever they come into the corporation, we can then allocate them quickly, find out where they are, far more easy than the system we're running at the moment, and then make sure that we have timely reminders about you know, you've got 5 days left, for example, you know, we need that answer now to get it resolved. So there's things that we can do in terms of system and processes that we're looking to enhance that customer experience.
Did you want to come back, Councillor Cox?
Yeah, I just wondered if there was any attempts to try and prioritise the departments you're working on this with the departments, because there are certainly some departments which are, shall we say, more keen. The public is more keenly aware of. And
yes,
in the review we just had, the survey we just had, there were certain services which clearly the public thought a lot more of than other services. And you know, and children's services and environment were certainly two of those. So, so on the basis that we seem to be falling down on those two particularly.
Yeah. So those are the wins that we'd want to get, certainly.
Councillor Phipps, did you indicate?
I was just looking at this table as well, and it's got Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4. These are different questions.
Quarters.
Sorry?
Quarters.
Quotas.
Quarters.
Okay. Because my question was going to be about different questions as such, because I am aware that sometimes requests don't get answered satisfactorily or to the satisfaction of perhaps a resident on the first occasion, and then they come back for a second go at it or ask again. So how does this quota kind of work percentage wise when people are coming back several times on an issue?
Mr. Channer.
Yeah, I'm just trying to Yeah, so that's quite difficult to the numbers don't reflect that. So in the first instance, as you say, the answer is that the request comes through and that initial response needs to be handled in a timely matter. What we find largely is that the as it were, the follow-up questions are the individual being formed by the answer. So in large part, an FOI is really a question of, does the authority hold the information, yes or no? And then, there's a judgment as to whether that information is releasable. And the operation thinking is that we try to release as much as we possibly can. And so we have tried to be transparent and release everything that we possibly can in the first instance. And so what then transpires is that the information they're given sort of enables the individual to ask a further question, often is what is, in my experience, happens.
Thank you, members. And thank you, Mr. Channon, for answering those questions for us. Could I take us now to the recommendations, which are all three for noting, but for the purposes of those online, I will read them out. So it's recommended that the committee note the information governance performance management information for 2022-23 for the 3 quarters to December 2022 contained in the report. This includes requests received under the Freedom of Information Act, the Environmental Information Regulations, the Data Protection Act, and other agency disclosure requests. B, the committee is asked to note the current composition of the information governance team. And thirdly, C, the committee are asked to note that currently a review is underway on the final internal audit report of March 2022. Can we agree to note those 3 recommendations, please? Right. Thank you very much, members, and thank you very much, Mr. Channon, for speaking to us this evening, and I apologise for the delay due to preceding business.
No problem. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, committee. Good evening.
Takes us on to item 9 on the agenda, which is the risk management corporate risk register update, and we have Fiona Manton, who is the council's risk and insurance manager. Ms. Manton. Good evening, Ms. Manton.
Good
apologies
evening.
for the delay in getting to your item.
Thank you.
Could you briefly introduce your report, please?
Thank you, Chairman. And good evening. This is the quarterly update to the committee of the Council's Corporate Risk Register. The report this quarter outlines the changes in the risks during the quarter, with the detail being provided in Appendix 1. The risks continue to be reported, including additional information, which includes the risk strategy being adopted to deal with any particular risk, and these risk treatments are outlined in paragraph 7 of my report. The update for this quarter is an interim position as the review process is ongoing. The available updates are included in Appendix 1, but the material changes are included in paragraph 11 of the report. In summary, risk CR4, failure to provide adequate IT and cybersecurity. A comprehensive update has been provided on this risk for this quarter, and this is reflected in the updates in Appendix 1. The scoring of the risk has also been increased to reflect the ongoing threat. The next risk which has been materially updated is CR8, inability to run a fair and open election / referendum. This risk again has been updated this quarter to reflect the ongoing work in this area. CR9, failure to maintain a safe and balanced budget for delivery of services, has also been updated for this quarter. And finally, in terms of changes, CR17 has been removed, but as in previous years, this risk will again be reflected on during the next quarter to determine whether it needs to be added back in as a corporate risk as we prepare for the next year, as it were. Risks continue to be routinely reviewed by Corporate Management Board. As part of this continuous dynamic review, CMB will complete a strategic review of the corporate risk register next week. This will look at each risk to review them in the context of how they are described, whether they are still continuing as corporate risks, and whether there are any new or additional risks that we need to be thinking about. This review will also be linked to the consideration of other local authorities' risk registers, professional standards and publications, and any other best practice guidance. So we'll feed all that information into a strategic review, and the outcome of that review will be reported to the next meeting. We continue to review service risk registers, and we report to CMB routinely on those as and when they're called in. As additional work, we're working to finalise a new risk app, and this will shortly be implemented for use for the recording of all service risks. Those were the points I wanted to draw to your attention, so thank you for giving me the opportunity to present my report. I'm happy to assist where I can with any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Manton. Just for the clarification for the committee, so the corporate risk review being undertaken by CMB, you referred would come back to audit and governance, presumably the next regular meeting in the new council cycle is
Yes.
what you meant, which would be on the 27th of July, and indeed it is marked there on the forward plan that we're coming to later. Presumably also that will be its first port of call outside of the officers as far as members of the new council are concerned. Is that correct?
Yes, Chairman, that's correct.
I just wanted to put some perspective on that, so that the time between here and there is time going to be spent actually on the review.
Yes, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So, members, questions? Councillor Cox.
I was just going to ask, is there a particular focus for this corporate review, CMB review? What were the feelings that the weaknesses might be that they're looking into?
Ms. Manton.
Thank you, Chairman. I think it's an opportunity to look at each risk in its own context, make sure that we're describing it correctly. We review the causes and the impact of each risk. As part of an annual process, we look at other authorities' risk registers just to make sure there's nothing we're missing that perhaps others are considering. So we take a sample of probably half a dozen to between 6 and 10 local authority risk registers and review them and compare them with ours. And it also gives the Corporate Management Board to discuss each risk as a group and perhaps look at them in more detail as a group than we would normally do so.
Mr. Richards, would you like to come in?
Yes, Chair, in the sense that probably just to reiterate what Fiona's actually just said, in the sense that I think from a corporate management board perspective, it was about trying to take that learning in good practice, make sure that, as part of an annual cycle, you're refreshing it and try and ensure it remains fit for purpose. And in that, ensuring that the description of the risks are as meaningful as we can get them, so as easily understood as they can be.
I just say I would welcome that, because obviously sometimes they're a bit opaque as to what they mean.
I certainly agree with that comment, Councillor Cox, and I too welcome the review on that principle and the wider principles as well. And I'm sure it will do the council good service for them to do that. Are there any other questions, members? No. In that case, can I go to the recommendation, which is again for noting, and it is that the committee note the update provided in this report relating to corporate risks. Can we agree to note?
Agree.
Thank you very much indeed, Ms. Manton. Again, apologies for keeping you waiting so long.
Thank you.
So, members, that takes us on to item 10 on the agenda, which is internal audit and the audit charter and audit plan for 2023-24. And I'll ask Nigel Stannard, the Council's Head of Audit and Management Assurance, to introduce the report. Mr. Stannard.
Thank you, Chairman. So yes, as you rightly say, the report sets out the audit charter and the audit plan for the 23-24 financial year. So first of all, just turning to the audit charter, which is shown at Appendix A of our report. Just a reminder, having a charter in place is a requirement of the public sector internal audit standards. And it sets out the purpose, authority, responsibilities and scope of the Council's internal audit team. The BCP Charter is subject to an annual evolutionary approach, a bit like the policies we talked about at our last committee. And reviewing the Charter on an annual basis is somewhat of a well-trodden path. You know, we've done it at this committee every year, and we've also done it at the predecessor audit and governance committees of the legacy councils. So this particular charter is the best practice of, sorry.
Mr. Stannard.
Yeah. So this particular charter is an evolution of many charters in the past and taking into account all the best practice of those legacy councils. Changes are shown in red text throughout the document and are this year fairly modest and small in nature. Probably the two most significant changes that I just wanted to draw your attention to is at section 1410 of the report, where some strategic and future focus intent has been added. And at section 16.7, and this is supplemented in a lot of detail at Annex 6, it sets out the data analytics strategy that we've added. Data analytics is not a new concept for internal audit, but the opportunities presented by the Council's transformational intent to increase our use of data insight is an exciting opportunity. The big prize for internal audit is how we can create a more continuous assurance model through the use and understanding of data in real time. So just to be clear, however, data analytics won't be suitable right across the council and won't be available in all service areas. And it certainly doesn't replace audit work. It just provides an additional audit tool and can present opportunities for greater efficiency and effectiveness of the team. So then turning to the internal audit plan for 23-24, you will recall that you agreed the high-level strategic plan and broad allocation of resources at your January committee, and that's shown in the table in the middle of the report. Work to finalise the detailed operational plan is well underway, and if I can particularly draw your attentions to paragraphs 14 and 15 of the report, I propose to circulate the final annual plan, that's the detailed plan, and more particularly the Q1 detailed plan to this committee by email, taking into account the rearranging of committees and bringing forward of this particular committee that we'd usually have in April. So happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Stannard. Members, do you have any questions, please? Councillor Cox.
I was interested in the data analytics tool, I think you called it. Is that a new thing? Because there's been data analytic tools around for quite a while. Some of them are good and some of them are pretty clunky. Is there a specific one you have in mind? And then the other question was actually in terms of what your work plan, how much of it is are you doing on the new system, this ERP system? Have you factored that into your work?
Mr. Stannard.
Yeah, the data analytics tool is not a specific tool kit. You know, it's not an off-the-shelf package. The strategy sets out our overall approach of how we're going to approach data analytics. And obviously with the council's use of Microsoft 365 and the apps that are within that, it gives us significant opportunity to create our own, dashboards, for example, on, statistics in real time that can take, or not replace, but can add assurance in real time. Segregation of duties. We talked about the journal controls, for example. So if we had data that showed who posted the journal, who signed it off in real time, it would give much more assurance in real time information. So that's the sort of data analytics we're talking about in sort of nitty gritty form. And then in terms of our, obviously our plan is risk-based, and there's a growing thought in the industry that annual plans may have had their day. You can sort of construct high-level annual plan on a resource basis, but trying to say what you are going to do in detail in 9, 10, 11 months' time with the ever-changing and market high-risk conditions that we live in is probably you can include things like your key financials, and they will certainly be in there. We've got our key assurance frameworks, so we've got our key financial system, health and safety arrangements, and so on. So those are certainly the key areas from that perspective, and the new ERP will be part of that the financial key assurance framework.
Councillor Cox, did you want to come back?
Yeah, just on that, and I agree with you on the annual plans probably had their day, but on that basis, that would have expected your current plan to have more contingency, and you seem to have cut the contingency down. Was there a particular reason why you've cut the contingency down for this year?
Mr. Stannard?
Yeah, I'll just go to the relevant page so I can just. Can you just scroll up a sec? Sorry. Thank you. So what you can see in the core audit and assurance work at the top level, where we set out high-level risks, that is quite a broad allocation. We're not specifying what those high risks are at this level. So in many ways, this is a sort of very high level contingency approach to resource planning. So I don't think that having a contingency in the sense of contingencies more for issues that might come through the door, such as an investigation that we're asked to do, that might be above and beyond our core allocations that we've got in here.
Councillor Brooke.
Thank you, Chair. It's in the same little box on page 79 of the documents we've got. Really, in a way, a bit in light of the audit and governance, the external audit and governance report, and some of the comments that were made with regard to transformation and efficiencies. I know we agreed the plan with you, I think last time, but it just seemed to me, in light of some of the comments that were made earlier, reducing that by 25 days is perhaps opening up to slightly more risks in terms of the transformation. And we know that each year it hasn't met its targets, it hasn't, it's significantly behind schedule. So how do you see your reduction of 25 going with regard to the points that were made in the external audit about transformation and the experiences we've had over the last 2 or 3 years of falling further and further behind and costing more and more and more?
Mr. Stannard.
Thank you, Councillor Brooke. The comments from the leader earlier around the extra tiers of governance that he's seeking to implement in the transformation area, This in many ways takes into account those sort of factors. So we have finite resource in internal audit. We believe we can get assurance from alternative areas in that particular instance, the new board or entity that's going to be looking at that. So our audit can slightly shift in its focus. So that's the thinking on that particular line.
Mr. Brooke?
Yeah, I can see where you're coming from. I'd just be personally, I'd just be a little bit wary of a team judging itself, as it were, as opposed to someone coming in from outside and looking at it. There's always that risk, isn't there, that you set up members of your own group to look at your group's work, which is what, in a way, that extra level that is being introduced is doing. So you've got to have assurances that it's actually operating as objectively as it can, if it is going to have value for your teams and your side and judgments.
Mr. Stannard.
Yeah, Councillor Brooke, you correctly point out that internal audit is the closest thing internal to an independent assessment of the effectiveness. So, but our subtle shift there will be to determine the effectiveness of the new board. And we could be making recommendations to the board to say you're not looking at this or you should be looking at that. So that's how our audit days might be cut, and we subtly change the focus of the audit rather than us doing all the work. A lot of the work will be done by the board, and we're considering the effectiveness of the board.
Okay. I'll buy that on this occasion.
Councillor Cox.
Yeah, I think that would only be effective though if that board was truly representative of the whole council, and not. I think Councillor Brooke seemed to imply that it might be just the administration, whoever the administration is on that. No, I would see that as inadequate, and that there needs to be some, what's the word? Critical thinking, some friendly. There's a word for it they use for schools, being a critical friend or something like that, and that would require a cross-party, whoever, as I say, emerges from the election. Whereas if it was, for instance, a one-party committee, then I fear that your reliance would be not good enough.
Mr. Stannard?
Your concerns are noted. Yeah, I can't really say anything more, I guess, at this point. Yeah.
Chief Executive, Mr. Farrant.
Thank you, Chairman. Sorry, I've had a bit of trouble with the transformation programme. But there is a request through the Overview and Scrutiny Committee to set up a cross-party working group, and Katie Lacey is currently working on the terms of reference to get that running over the next 3 or 4 weeks, so that we can start to engage councillors on that cross-party basis. I think the work that Councillor Broadhead was talking about earlier on was within the administration, within the cabinet. So we're looking to set up 2 additional work streams for councillors' engagement in the transformation programme, getting that overview, if that's helpful.
Thank you very much indeed, Chief Executive. So, members, if there are no more questions, can I take us to the recommendations, which I will again read out. The first one is an approval, the other 2 are for noting, so I will take them all together in that case. So we're asked to approve the internal audit charter, including the internal audit data, analytics strategy, and agree that the chair signs the document to record this approval. And the 2 for noting are to note that the 2023-24 detailed core internal audit plan will be presented at the July 2023 Audit and Governance Committee, and to note that the 2023-24 budget for the Internal Audit Service which was approved by Council as part of the 2023-24 Council budget setting and medium-term financial plan update in February 2023. Can we agree to approve and to note the other two? Is that agreed? Thank you very much, members. Takes us to item 11 on the agenda, which is the internal audit fourth quarter interim audit plan update. And again, it's Mr. Stannard, Head of Audit and Management Assurance. Mr. Stannard.
Thank you, Chair. Delivery of the 22-23 audit plan is well progressed, as you would hope it is by this late period in the year, as we approach financial year end. This is, however, very much an early interim report out of necessity caused by the pre-election period and the bringing forward of this committee's sitting from the usual mid-April date. So just to go through some of the key points, 7 audits have been completed in this quarter period. They're shown in the table at paragraph 4. All 7 audits have been given a reasonable assurance opinion, except the audit at line 4, which was the partnership CAF, which was undertaken as more of a consultancy review, and there wasn't an opinion on that one. That you recall came out of some of the actions in the annual governance statement. An internal audit acted a bit like Councillor Cox said in the last agenda item, as a critical friend to some of the things that had already been completed. So things like the partnership register, did it have exactly what we thought it should have on it? Elsewhere in the report, the table at paragraph 5 shows the audits in progress, of which there are currently 33, and a further 5 audits will commence in March. A reminder that where fieldwork straddles the financial year, the audit forms part of both the old and the new year audit plan, and they're clearly titled 22, 23, 24 audit to try and differentiate. Since writing this report, I've also been asked by the Chief Operations Officer, Jess Gibbons, to look at the governance and decision-making arrangements around seafront concessionaires, including but not limited to the Bayside catering pop-up. So that is also been added to the schedule that you might see in this report. So happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stannard. Members' questions. Councillor Phipps.
Just a comment, really. Page 120 at the bottom, right at the bottom of the page. Audit 2023 audit plan changes. That one is postponed. Yeah, replaced with our monitoring report, C29 above. It's actually 30 above, I think.
Mr. Stannard.
Councillor Phipps is correct. That's my mistake. Apologies for that error.
Can I just ask a question as well? Well, I've just pointed that out. On that bottom one, it says, or it says somewhere here, oh yeah, that right at the bottom, replaced with high risk audit review on our monitoring. What does that mean, high risk? That's all. It's like right at the bottom of page 20, the audit plan changes, number 1, postponed until 23-24 and replaced with high risk audit review. So it's actually now high risk review, whereas previously it didn't say that it was.
Mr. Stannard.
I think again that's probably lazy language, and I should have said higher risk review, higher risk audit review, because obviously you and others and this committee's raised issues with the ARG monitoring, so we've replaced what would have been part of just a standard economic development audit with that specific audit that people have requested.
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, that's what I wanted to identify, and you have, so thank you. I'm pleased about that. Thank you very much.
Councillor Cox.
It's only a comment. I think I asked for it before, but that where you have the total recommendations, I always think it's useful to have it as a comparison for the previous year, just so you can have a table as to how many recommendations there are in a particular year and how serious they are, because there may be a trend.
Mr. Stannard, I seem to recall us discussing that actually a while ago.
Yep, Councillor Cox is absolutely correct. What we're going to do though is, because almost the comparison on a quarterly basis is somewhat skewed because audits get completed, I'm going to include that in my annual Chief Internal Auditor's annual report. So there will definitely be comparison of recommendations year on year.
So, members, if there are no more questions of Mr. Stannard, can I go to the recommendation, which is simply for the committee to note progress made and issues arising on the delivery of the 2022-23 internal audit plan. Can we agree to note? Thank you very much, members. Takes us to the final item on the agenda, item 12, which is the forward plan, the indicative forward plan for the 2023-24 municipal year. I've got a comment to make in just a moment about the first date on there and the context of it. But Mr. Stannard, is there anything you'd like to say in introduction to this report first?
You very much hit the nail on the head, Chair, with the word indicative. So what I've attempted to do is to include all of the reports that would feature in the current audit and governance terms of reference as a requirement of this committee to look at. And I've obviously left the extra meetings free, where the new committee can decide what it wants to look at in any more depth or in detail, a bit like the way you've enabled that to happen in the past, Chair.
So, members, I just wanted to say a little bit about this first, it's termed extra date. So let's cast our minds back 4 years, when in fact we only had 4 meetings a year, but we felt that we would have extra ones put onto the forward plan, and in turn I would write to all members of the council, which I've done regularly, and to all members separately of audit and governance, to find out whether there are any issues relevant to our work that should be put on there, whether reports should be raised through officers for those. And I think it's a system that has worked very well. It's also allowed us sometimes to move very heavy agendas so that we can offload some of the work into a different meeting. And I think that has worked well, as I say. Of course, the composition of the next Audit and Governance Committee, and indeed the Chairman's discretion in all of those issues are a matter for the future, and not something that we can foretell tonight. And I just wonder whether that first meeting on the 8th of June, which is an additional meeting anyway, is going to be likely to have anything on the agenda, because if whoever's chairing Audit and Governance repeats a similar process, and there's no other way really of doing it, then there won't be sufficient time from members being allocated to Audit and Governance before that first meeting on the 8th of June and the work that will be necessary to prepare reports. So I think it's a meeting that is highly unlikely to take place, simply because there won't be any business to put into it. If it was necessary to call an emergency meeting for some reason I cannot think of Audit and Governance before the 27th of July, pardon? Before the 27th of July, then due process would enable that to happen one way or another, wouldn't it? So what I'm wondering, members, is wouldn't it be better just to strike that one out, and then leave it to the discretion of the future chairman and committee as to how they want to conduct the business of Audit and Governance at that stage? as Mr. Stannard has said, the other ticks in the boxes are all on the regular meeting cycle and would be there at that time anyway. So that's not really for us to alter at this stage. So I make those points. I hope that's helpful. Councillor Cox.
Just one point. The statement of accounts that presumably relates to 21-22, and that should probably appear twice because I think we're talking about doing 2 years in that year. So you might want to put the first tick in the box might be 21-22, and then maybe 6 months later the next one.
Mr. Stannard.
No, that's not quite right. So the external audit reports down the bottom lay out exactly what you've just said, Councillor Cox, but that top one is the pre-audited statement of accounts for BCP Council for 22-23 that would come to this committee after public inspection period. As our draft, as our pre-audited draft.
The non-statutory pre-audited.
This is what we propose to pass to audit, external auditors to audit, as our pre-audited statement of accounts.
Right. Yeah, got you.
Content. Councillor Phipps.
Just, I don't mind taking out June. Don't get me wrong here or anything, but it looks like 27th of July and certainly 26th of August, which is the standard, October, beg your pardon, which are the standard meetings, are quite full. So what happens then if we've got something that, for instance, and I always come up with this, the ARG report that is likely to come back to this committee, is it? Or is it not? And if it is, then where would that kind of fit in? Would that still have to be like the 27th of July, which looks really busy? Or, you know, or have we got anything else that's outstanding from this year that should be coming back to this committee, and how would they fit in?
Mr. Stannard.
I didn't quite hear. Did you say the ARG report?
Yeah, like the monitoring report. Yeah, that was said would, I believe it was said it would come back. Yeah, was that not the case?
Chairman, would you like to say, because you said something earlier, did you say something earlier?
Well, what I said earlier was that hopefully very shortly I will be writing to all members of Audit and Governance with the report and indeed answering your email, Councillor Phipps, and an external one from Mr. Redman. That wasn't to suggest that I was going to do any more than that, because this is our last meeting of this council term for Audit and Governance. I don't think it would be for me to say whether it should come back in the new council or not, because we can't predict the future, can we? Equally, I think it's very unlikely we'll be having an additional meeting in the life of this council, because after the 23rd of March we're not able to because of PERDA. So I think it is a matter for the future, and I don't want to prejudge the report because I haven't actually seen it, so I can't. And I think we have to wait and see what that says, and then in the democratic process deal with it accordingly. I don't think we can do more than that. But in answer to the other part of your question, I think I have endeavoured as best I can with officers to make sure that we haven't got any issues hanging over that we could or should deal with in this council, because I don't think that would be good practice. So I've tried to make sure that we've encapsulated those either tonight or the previous meeting. Time will tell whether I was successful. So I think, could I ask members of the committee, are you content that for the forward plan and for democratic services, we take that meeting out on the 8th of June, because I don't think there's any business to conduct that soon after the allocation of seats on Audit and Governance after the elections.
Great.
Is that agreed? Thank you, members. So just before I close the meeting, I have indicated that it's the last one of this council for Audit and Governance. And so there were a couple of comments I just wanted to make before we finish. The first is to thank all of you for your help and your support during these last 4 years when I've been chairing Audit and Governance. We've had our moments, I know, but we have made it work. And I think we've made it work pretty well. And I think we've all made it work, is my point. It's always a difficult one. And I've gathered through those 4 years that members are very, very engaged in this process. And I've got to say, I've seen Audit and Governance, not just in predecessor authorities, but on other authorities outside of this area where that isn't the case. And indeed, you know, you're trying desperately to get up to a full quota of councillors. You can't do it with anybody or with a number of people who will be fully engaged. That hasn't been the case. And for that, I think we need to give ourselves a pat on the back because we've discharged those responsibilities for the residents we serve, I think, in a really meaningful way. And thank you for participating and making that happen. Really appreciate it. I'd like to say thank you to the officers, not just the 3 remaining officers from distinct services, Ms. Sykes, Mr. Richins and Mr. Stannard, but to Democratic Services and the whole team for helping to make this an effective part of the council's work. And I think that it would be helpful if that could be recorded, please, Mr. Hampton, because I think it's important that we are collectively, that we have actually said that. And I suppose finally, although there's an uncertain future for all but one of us, I'd like to thank Councillor Brooke for his help and support, knowing that he isn't standing in the elections in May, and to wish you a long and happy retirement from the work of council. I think you've earned it and you deserve it, and I'm sure you'll reflect positively on your time as a councillor. Councillor Brooke.
And thank you, Chairman, and that your comments are much appreciated. It's been interesting actually going around my ward and meeting people over the last few weeks and hearing their comments on the doorstep, and it's actually quite humbling. So again, thank you to you. Can I return the compliment and say that you have actually made this committee what it is through your chairmanship. It is an important committee. In fact, it's probably the most important committee on council relating to the audit and governance, and you have actually drawn in a large number of councillors in your approach by asking them for their thoughts and comments and issues that could be considered. And I think that has added very much to the way the committee's operated. And I would like to think that it's actually turned it into a more interesting committee as well, because there are, as you rightly say, not many councillors who want to take on audit and governance because they think it's inappropriate or boring or whatever, but actually it is fascinating to get behind the scenes, as it were, of how a council actually works or should work. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Councillor Brooke, for those kind and extremely generous comments. But thank you to thank you to all of you for making it work, because none of us could do it individually, and we have made it work, in my opinion, to the very best of our ability. So thank you all very much indeed, and maybe we'll see each other on the other side. Who knows? I'll close them. Well, that too. I'll therefore close this meeting of Audit and Governance at 21:34. Thank you all very much for attending.